Good afternoon, everyone. This is the City of Aspen work session for July 14th. We have one item we're going to discuss at this special meeting that was continued from our regular meeting last week, and then we will go into our regularly planned work session at 4 p.m. So the only item, we will ask Mr. True, standing in for Nicole, our clerk, to call the roll, please.
Councilor Benedetti.
Here.
Councilor Doyle.
Here.
Councilor Guth.
Here.
Councilor Rose.
Here.
Mayor Richards.
Here. And the item today is the Lumberyard Master Development Agreement with Gorman and Company, and it was postponed so we could do a little further investigation on the public partnership representation we're getting. I will turn this over to Chris Everson and our manager for any other further introduction.
Thank you, Mayor Richards, members of City Council. Council did continue Resolution 100 of 2025 from last week and requested that the agreement with Gorman be amended with language which would limit the city's expense exposure prior to closing. Council also requested additional information about the qualifications of the attorney which the city has hired to assist with the development of this agreement and with this overall project with Gorman. To that end, we did amend the contract, the agreement with Gorman, to include a per closing cap on the expenses that the developer may seek in the event of a termination prior to closing at $5 million per closing. Also, there was some information in the memo about the qualifications of Mr. Dalton Kelly with Butler Snow. Is there anything you want to add about any of that?
Yes, I would. If this is the appropriate time, I would like to address that matter.
Yes, that sounds good. Mr. Attorney?
James R. True, Special Counsel. Mayor and Council, as I indicated at our meeting on last Tuesday, I was comfortable with the qualifications of the attorneys who provided us assistance in negotiation and finalization of the development agreement, Gorman and Company, Dalton Kelly, and Kim Crawford with the law firm of Butler Snow. However, given the questions posed by Council and the desire to be assured that we're receiving the best advice on both financial side and the deal structure, I agreed that it was appropriate to continue for consideration of continue the development agreement to discuss their qualifications with those attorneys at Butler Snow. Kate and I, along with Chris Everson, were able to discuss this matter with Dalton and Kim last week when we again provided the experience and expertise of these two, as well as the entire team at Butler Snow. Their experience in financing and deal structure and public-private partnerships is extensive, as they have represented numerous Colorado municipalities and partnerships, such as addressed here. After our discussion, I was very comfortable in responding to the request of me from Councilor Guth at the last meeting, in which he said, quote, "If you have that confidence that their team has presented that best possible advice on structure of a public-private partnership master development agreement from a municipal perspective, great." I am happy to state here that I do very much have that confidence in our team from Butler and Snow. If you have any questions, Kate and I are happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see Bill's hand up now on the screen, but Bill, are you there?
I am.
Okay, for some reason I'm just not seeing you as a participant. Do you have any further questions?
Thank you, Jim, for that follow-up and for the memo. That certainly satisfies me from that perspective, and I appreciate it and glad that we have great representation. The only follow-up question I would have is for Chris, and curious how we came up with that $5 million per closing cap number.
We discussed that with the developer, and we do have Kimball Krangle on the line with Gorman. We initially started our conversations in the range of around $4 million. Because of the use of modular construction, there may be some other sort of upfront costs that might not occur on a site-built project, and so that was the reason why we ended up at a cap of $5 million rather than $4 something.
Okay, and then Chris, if you could, for the general public, explain what is this clause that would be reimbursed if we do not go forward with closings? And what materials would we gain from that work that they've done that we would potentially inherit if we, again, did not close with them?
Sure. The developer has a due diligence period during which they could terminate the project. The city could terminate the project during that period. During that time, there are certain conditions under which the developer can request the reimbursement of their out-of-pocket expenses to that point. If that occurs, it's capped at $5 million per closing, and so the city's exposure, there are two separate closings, but the city's exposure at any one time does not exceed $5 million. That essentially helps them fund architecture, engineering, survey, soils, drainage, accessibility, environmental consulting, traffic consulting, project management expenses, and modular pre-construction expenses, as well as legal and other professional services that will be necessary for the pre-development effort.
Thank you. So again, should, for any reason, this not close, we have a cap on the total amount of money we would owe them for their pre-development work, and we would then acquire all the survey and soils testing, anything like that they had done. My question a little earlier, talking to the manager, was what if the vote didn't pass in November, and that was part of the change, and I was assured they're really not going to have that much work done by November of this year that would potentially throw this into chaos given a vote.
That's true, plus also the agreement already contains a provision that allows the city to adjust, to work with Gorman to adjust the phasing plan in the event that the vote doesn't pass, so that we can do at least a single first phase.
Okay, thank you very much. Bill, is that satisfactory to your question?
It is the only, and thank you very much, Chris and Rachel, you had great points there. I just wanted to sort of highlight the one point that you made about us inheriting the rights to use all those materials. And I do think that's a very intelligent and important point. And I want to make sure that we explicitly have that the licenses to use all of the drawings generated by the consultants and work products generated by the consultants either are in our name from the beginning alongside Gorman's, or would transfer to be in our name immediately upon a termination scenario. I think that's critical, and I want to reiterate that, I think, very thoughtful point.
I think the way the contract's written at this time, they would be transferred upon termination.
Okay, were you able to hear that, Bill?
Yeah, and as long as the agreements that are being executed with, the architect, for one example, but not the only, have a stipulation in there that in the event of a termination, the work product will be transferred to the city of Aspen, and they're consenting to as much. That's great by me.
That's correct.
I think that's how it would be done as we move forward with reviewing the contracts with their subcontractors, which I believe we have clearly a right to approve all subcontracts and contractors, or at least to consult with them before their contracts are entered.
There's also specific language that requires the developer in that case to submit invoices and other pertinent backup related to all of those expenses as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and I appreciate you taking the time to zoom in. It's always hard during summer when people try to squeeze a little family time in. Council members, any questions from the table or a motion to approve Resolution 100?
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, and this resolution references the new contract that is written with the $5 million cap, correct?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. Would you call the roll?
Councilor Benedetti?
Yes.
Councilor Doyle?
Yes.
Councilor Guth?
Yes.
Councilor Rose?
Yes.
Mayor Richards?
Yes. Thank you very much. I would take a motion to end the special meeting.
So moved.
Okay. Is there a
Second.
Whoops, sorry.
Second.
Okay. Before we call the roll, I did want to mention that today is the last day for applying for the Aspen 360 Government Services Program to learn all about where your tax dollars go and how each department runs. So if you are watching this at 3:42, you have a little more time to get your application in. Thank you very much. I think we have 13 attendees already signed up, and that sounds like a good freshman class for this year, but there's room for a few more if anyone sees that. Thank you very much, and will you call the roll, please?
Councilor Benedetti?
Yes.
Councilor Doyle?
Yes.
Councilor Guth?
Yes.
Councilor Rose?
Yes.
Mayor Richards?
Yes. The special meeting is over, and we have about 15 minutes until the 4 o'clock work session will start. So we'll take a little break. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, to the Aspen City Council work session of July 14th. It's 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and we are going to hear several different items. Our second item is going to be a review of the demolition permit program. And then our first item is the potential tax questions for the November 2025 ballot. We are going to take the Confluence Early Childhood Education issue first for discussion. Our colleague Sam will be conflicted out of discussing the fire district and the school district. And so we'll do that one first before he has to leave the room. So let's have you up to the front, introduce yourselves, and give us an overview of what the program is, what the community benefits will be, and what you're asking. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Great. I will share my screen.
In the meantime, I'm Hannah Berman. I'm on the sustainability team for Aspen 1 and on Basalt Town Council. And I've been involved with CC for about 5 years. And part of the reason why we joined the Child Care Coalition is, as the largest employer in the Valley, I think we see a disproportionate number of stressed out parents, particularly moms, who have been struggling, particularly with the cost of care. And we saw this as an opportunity that would benefit our employees, but also by benefiting the whole community.
Thank you, Hannah.
And I'm Maggie Tiscornia. I am the director of the Confluence Early Childhood Education Coalition, and I'm also a mom of 2 little ones. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and grew up in Glenwood Springs, moved back in 2018 to start my family. So this topic also hits close to home for me on many levels. So excited to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. We are discussing our ballot initiative for affordable, accessible childcare from Aspen to Parachute. And the Confluence Early Childhood Education Coalition, or CC Coalition, is a group of education, nonprofit, business, and parent leaders from Aspen to Parachute who've been working together since 2017 to improve access and affordability of early care and education, including childcare and preschool for children ages birth to 5. So this is a list of our members and advisors who've been active on the coalition. And I just want to note that the City of Aspen's Kids First program has been an active advisor since the beginning, since 2017. So we've just learned a tremendous amount from the successes of your program, and are just incredibly grateful for all of the wisdom, insights that we've gained and have helped us to get this proposal to this point. So from the beginning, the CC Coalition has been focused on a regional strategy to raise local sustainable public funding to make early childhood education more affordable and more accessible to families throughout the region.
Yeah. And this probably isn't news to most of you, but early childhood education is one of the biggest ROI public goods you can invest in. Kids who have good quality access to early child care often read earlier, they're better prepared for kindergarten, so we're sending them to the school district better prepared to learn how to read and be part of a classroom in our community. They have better developed life skills, earn higher wages, and the majority of what we talk about, has cute pictures of kids and toddlers and infants, and that is really the focus of this. But the unglamorous part of supporting the childcare system in our valley is that it's also critical for working parents, and we see working parents, particularly women, drop out of the workforce when they can't afford care. SKICO had one, management level employee who went to have her last child, ended up having twins, and there just wasn't a way to make that math work, even though she was in a position that we could be flexible on timing, things like that, because of the cost of care in this valley. And so the cost of care here is expensive. And so we find that with the median tuitions in Pitkin County, having 2 kids in early childcare is going to run you about $2,500 to $3,800 a month. That's about 35% of the median income here. And with housing costs being what they are and the cost of living being what it is, that's often too much for parents to have an authentic choice to stay in the workforce. And unfortunately, we see that as pressure on our employment in the valley. And the other piece of this is that there's limited capacity of childcare spots, particularly for infants. We only have enough spots in licensed facilities for about 44% of the kids under the age of 5. I've talked to multiple women now who spoke about finding care, and one of them said she got on the Blue Lake preschool waiting list before calling her husband to tell him that she was pregnant. So it's kind of a battle zone out there to get a spot. And we want to ensure that we can help both with affordability, but also capacity of the system to be able to get enough spots for the kids in our valley. All right, and we are doing this as a regional approach. We're starting here in Aspen, but as you guys know so well, this is a community corridor. This is an employment corridor. We have families up and down the valley working in Aspen, and we know that families cross lines on their commutes every day to get their kids to school, to come to work. There's a pretty good mix of how many families want care close to home or close to work. We certainly hear both from our employees, and we want to make sure that parents are able to get a spot somewhere, step one, but step two, to be able to have a little more choice over their parenting and their childcare options. And we also know through community conversations, which we've had hundreds of conversations with parents and educators, council members, and other folks in this community, that because of our economy in this valley, that we need options for non-traditional hours. We have folks starting jobs early. We have folks who have to be there in person and don't have a remote option to be able to scoop their kid at 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m. And we know the majority of the workforce here lives down valley, and so we're trying to give them a genuine option through this tax measure to be able to get care in the first place, but then be able to stay in the workforce as well.
Santa. So in terms of what we are proposing, in order to do this in a regional way, the way we identified to be able to do that is through an early childhood special tax district, which is a type of special district that was authorized by the state legislature in 2019, which gave communities like ours the opportunity to pursue this option. We would be the first such district in the state of Colorado. And this district would encompass all of Garfield, all of Pitkin, and the southwest portion of Eagle County that's in the Roaring Fork School District. Like Hannah said, based on years of coalition work and significant community input, we developed a detailed service plan that outlines the services that the district would focus on. And those are listed here, and they include tuition assistance to help families afford care, grants to providers to help increase the number of slots available for families, and to make quality improvements, including wage enhancements to better retain, recruit and retain staff, outreach and navigation of services to assist families in finding the care that meets their needs, and evaluation of the program and administrative costs. It is important to note that the district is envisioned to coordinate with and provide funding to support the programs and the providers already doing amazing work. So not to duplicate efforts or add unnecessary bureaucracy, but rather to fund directly the providers and families as efficiently as possible. So for example, the district would not establish and operate childcare programs or facilities or direct services.
Mm-hmm. And it's really about creating the bandwidth to help these childcare centers do what they need to do. I was talking to one head of a childcare center who had lost a teacher with 2 master's degrees because she said, looking at the Wendy's, she's going to make more money flipping burgers per hour than teaching local toddlers, even though she's this amazing teacher who's qualified. That childcare center knows they need to be able to pay their teachers a little bit more. That's what we're just trying to do, is create the bandwidth and the resources to be able to help them get to where they need to have a healthy system.
And the plan proposes a 0.25% sales tax. That would exclude everyday essential items like groceries, medications, gas, feminine hygiene products, diapers, and other essential items would not be included in that tax, and it would raise an estimated $10 million annually. The district would be overseen by a voter-elected 5-member board of directors, each of whom will represent a geographical portion of the district, and those are drawn, you can see the seat map on the slide, those are drawn based on the statutory requirement that each boundary have, as near as practically possible, the same number of registered electors. So with that, in March, we held public hearings and gained unanimous approvals from all 3 boards of county commissioners in Pitkin, Garfield, and Eagle counties. And that gave us the green light to go to the voters with this proposal at a November election. And we also had to gather signatures for our voter petition to file with the district court. And we gathered over 1,000 signatures in May. And on July 7th, the coalition officially decided to file with the district court to be placed on this November's ballot. So that's where we are now. We're thrilled to be at this stage after so many years of working on this. And we are working on officially launching our campaign called Strong Start, Bright Future for Our Kids. So with that, thank you so much. And we think this proposal aligns with your early childhood education priorities, and think that collectively this will strengthen our efforts to make early childhood education more affordable and more accessible for families. So we'd appreciate any individual endorsements as elected officials, and of course there will be a lot of opportunities to engage with the campaign if you're interested. So with that,
Yeah.
happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. We're really trying to hear these for the public, so we're not going to be taking endorsements or looking for endorsements at this table at this time. That could come later on as we're past July and things start really, and people start paying attention to it a little more. Let me ask a few questions. How will we find out who the candidates for directors are, and how do people potentially become candidates for directors?
Yes, great question. It is a self-nomination process, and my understanding is they will file with the DEO, the designated election official, or with the district.
For each county, or?
For each seat. So it's not a process that we are arbitrating in any way. It's directly with the court to put their name on the ballot.
But will you be advertising it so people know? I mean, and there's no signature gathering at all, so you could have 20 candidates for any one of these seats? There's no primary and no
That's
signatures?
right. Yes.
Okay,
Yes, this will be included in a public notice as well.
okay. Thank you for that. Do you know what the deadline is for people putting their name in for directors? Is that going to be the end of August as well?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but we
Okay.
will.
We can follow up with that, though.
Yeah, that'd be great to get a little more information out to the public on that side of it. The other thing is, you will fund tuition assistance, and you mentioned kind of grants so they can potentially provide more spaces. But isn't that getting into funding facilities, or are you going to potentially be able to fund construction of new childcare centers?
That is within that grants category, it could be.
Okay,
Yeah.
it could be.
As written in the service plan, the vast majority, it goes to tuition assistance, and then obviously there's kind of flexibility. It depends who's on the board, but the service plan enables both expansion of facilities, but also supporting facilities to run at full capacity. So some places we see aren't able to have enough teachers or have too much turnover to run at full capacity and have full classrooms.
Okay.
So it allows support through that avenue as well.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense. Board members, questions on the Early Childhood Education Coalition here? If there's not, that's okay. We were just listening, but go ahead, Sam.
I was wondering, do you know the amount of kids 0 through 5 in these 3 counties at this time?
About 5,100 kids under
Okay.
age 5.
And the 10 million is what you project to get. Do you have a projected number of like what you'd like to be able to accomplish certain tangible goals? Because we just met with Kids First, and they were like, if you want to fund the whole thing, this is how much you need. So you guys are going for a percentage and a nominal amount, but like how much do you need to accomplish what you're trying to do ultimately?
So the federal standard for what you're supposed to pay for childcare is 7% of your income, and we see that in our valley, it's more like 15 given the median income. And this amount wouldn't fully make it 7%. Maggie can fact check me here, but it would help close that gap and at an average level, try and get childcare costs to down more like 10%.
Okay, so similar goals to Kids First.
Yeah. And part of this process has been making sure that we can stack with other programs. So we can stack with Kids First, we can stack with CCAP, other things that are helping families.
And do you, will the new board of directors, they'll determine where the funding goes? There is a chance that funding will be put towards maybe like more like the parachute rifle area versus the Aspen area, or is it the goal to try to evenly spread it out as best one can, or is it more of a triage situation depending on how the whole region is feeling?
There is flexibility so that the board of directors can adjust things, but as it's written in the service plan and as it's been discussed among the coalition, the idea is that like there would be help from Aspen to Parachute and it would be on a sliding scale. So, lower income families are gonna get a bit more tuition support than higher income earners.
Okay. Well, I made the same comment, Kids First, and just something that I'd like to say as far as like trying not to bracket it, where if you make one more dollar, you're in the next bracket and you end up like not wanting to make more money. Sliding, please make it actually sliding and not punishing people for making more money.
Yes, yes.
And so the Aspen representative will be 1 vote out of 5. And you use the term stacking. I'm just concerned that if we're from our Kids First money paying a $500 tuition bonus to each teacher each month, is it possible this board can say, well, Aspen's already taking care of its teachers, we'll just spread the rest of this money down Valley? Or will there have to be equal distribution among the grants to the teachers across the whole valley, the whole district?
Well, that's not directly written into the service plan, because the service plan is more for general kind of guiding principles and objectives, and it will be the board determining these kinds of direct policies to allow them the flexibility to adapt as needs change moving forward. Our vision and recommendation is to make that available throughout the region, because we know that costs are different in Aspen than they are down Valley as well. So for teachers might need more funding to stay in the sector than they would in another part of the region. And the same with affordability. Affordability looks different for families in Aspen than it does down Valley. So we want to see the support throughout the region.
Yeah, I really appreciate the concept and bringing this forward. I would just hate to see a future board where we have no control over, and you would have no control over, say, well, Aspen already has that half cent or 0.45. They can take care of their teachers. We need all this money down Valley. And, but a future council could turn around and say, well, that is the housing daycare tax. We're going to put all the money into housing now that we have this new 1/4 cent sales tax on top of ours. So, things can switch around. I just want to make sure it's getting to the kids and that it's equitable, and we're not, I think the real estate in Aspen, Pickens County in some ways, and the pricing and the tourism was going to carry a lot of the load. And again, we are first to acknowledge a lot of our workforce comes from down Valley, and those childcare needs are rare. I wish that there was a little more guidance going into the board, that we would have a sense of who they are and what they're going to do and how they plan to use this. Because I'd hate to see us cut back because we're already working for childcare, and so we kind of get punished by that. That would be wrong.
Yeah, I hear you. And those are good questions, and they're also things that will or should be addressed by any council person running. They're going to need to be able to talk about that with the public and defend their views and explain why they think the way they do. And then people will know that and vote accordingly.
Now, what happens to the district if it passes in 3 out of the 5 districts? If it doesn't pass in Parachute or it doesn't pass in Aspen, does the whole proposal go away, or is it instituted in just the communities that pass it?
No, it's one proposal for the whole district and needs to win by a majority of 50 plus 1.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other further questions that have come up? Otherwise, we'll say thank you for your time. It was a very thorough presentation. We understand the county commissioners have already agreed to put this on the ballot, and so we wish you well. It'll be a lot of hard work.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Okay. And now we're going to go to the Aspen Fire District for their presentation.
And just for the record, I would note Councilmember Rose has stepped out of the room. He has a conflict of interest with respect to this item, this particular item, the fire district tax question, and the tax questions related to the school district. And so for those 2 items, he will not be present in the room. He can return upon completion of those discussions. Thank you.
For the demolition permit discussion following. Okay, thank you. Well, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Didn't have to wear your uniforms. We're kind of casual around here.
Hey, it's school hours right now, so, you know, I gotta wear my polo.
Okay, there we go. So Aspen Fire District, please introduce yourselves and take it away.
Hi, my name's Rick Ballantyne, the Fire Chief and CEO of Aspen Fire Protection District.
Thank you.
I am Allie Hammond, the Director of Community Wildfire Resilience with Aspen Fire.
And I'm Jake Anderson. I'm the Operations Chief with Aspen Fire. So thanks again for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. And it's your chance to be on TV and talk to the whole public as you explain it to us.
Okay. Great. Well, I think Chief has to leave here shortly, so I guess I'll let you start.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have another meeting I have to get to shortly, but I just want to say thanks for having us. We're happy to come here and share with you and share the public what our initiatives potentially could be in November. We're still walking through the community, getting feedback, getting some surveys out there, so we haven't made a decision. Obviously, our board hasn't made a decision yet, but they'll be meeting on it very soon to talk about that. You know, I just want to say that, you know, we've worked really hard over the last several years of really getting our response times down in this district. From where we were before when we were all volunteer. Now, as you guys know, we now have 2 fully staffed stations, 24/7, 365. But there's still a lot of needs out there. Number one, to be able to maintain response times as our call volumes grow larger and larger every year. You know, we did just, you know, recently start the Wildfire Division, which we hired Allie to take over, you know, just recently, not, you know, several years ago, but there's a big need for that. As we've gained more public input, we gain more public education, it's sort of growing. Now we need, you know, we need to staff some more positions potentially. We need to do much more wildfire mitigation and to really stay where we need to be in terms of community service.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right on. Yeah, and I apologize. I think I misunderstood. I would have brought some more materials for you guys so we could give you some visuals as well. I thought this was just going to be more of a Q&A. But to give you a little background on what we are considering this year is we have a bond that was originally used to construct the downtown fire station and the North 40 fire station. That will be sunsetting after 2026. And so that's where that question comes from is, without raising taxes or without an increase to the tax rate, can we continue to collect these funds? We have some outstanding needs, specifically the wildfire problem, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and our capital and facilities planning, which was what that money was used to construct, which is the primary purpose that those monies would be then redirected toward. That's 0.24 mils and would bring in a little under 1.1 million annually. The second piece that we're considering is for the first time in Colorado history, because of probably similar statutes to what has allowed some of these other special districts to go for a sales tax. As of July of this year, fire districts are allowed to collect a sales tax as well. And so we are considering a 0.5% sales tax that would have the same exceptions or exclusions or exemptions, I guess, that the state has. So, groceries for personal consumption, diapers, feminine care products, many of your, I guess, daily consumables. And that does change the number dramatically. I think we're looking at somewhere between a 30 to 35-ish% decrease just by adding in those exemptions and how much that has impacted our revenues or potential revenues. The main purpose behind that is that even as we looked at our capital needs and we looked at retaining that 0.24, that doesn't meet our needs. Our needs moving forward to stay solvent with our fleet and facilities are in excess of $2 million annually, and a lot of that is driven by the skyrocketing costs of fire apparatus. The ladder truck that we bought that's sitting over there right now, I think we paid $1.2 million for. By the time we replace that, which we need to begin that process here over the next couple of years, it will be in excess of $3 million to buy that. The engines that we recently purchased just 2 or 3 years ago, so we've got some time on them. But we paid right around $800K for them. They're already upwards of 1.4. And as we draw that out over time, it's not coming close to any sort of aging factor that we had planned for historically, as far as how high those prices are going. The other main issue that we're trying to address is we see, as I'm sure most of you do, this massive service gap in the wildfire area throughout the valley and locally. The wildfire problem, as we're experiencing it nationally, or even more locally in Colorado, isn't something that we can't solve. It's not something that we can't fix. There are evidence-based practices that can be put into place to essentially solve this problem, right? Where I guess our vision is, wouldn't it be great if we had a big wildfire burning around town and the messaging was go to town, right? We're prepared for this. And I think as we stand today, that's not 100% the case. There's a lot we can do, but that's going to take time, energy, focus, and funding. And that's the main reasons that we're here. So we would be looking to shore up our capital plan and to fund the creation and expansion of essentially a wildfire division, while we also improve our training and our internal processes and personnel staffing levels to support those things. If you live if you're on the city council, you live in our fire district. So you've probably received multiple mailers, and those will give you, I guess, the high points. But yeah, we're definitely open to feedback and happy to take questions. And I think, Allie and Rick, even as we've been sitting in this meeting, are still working really, really hard on other ways of funding. We're doing whatever we can to leverage the generosity of our community in all the different ways that can happen. I think there'll be some news coming out about some of the fundraisers that we've already had and another one we're having this week. Initially, we did look at higher tax rates, et cetera, and we came down to 0.5 because we feel like that's the minimum amount that we need to make these things work, while we still explore other avenues to fund different wildfire projects, even wildfire apparatus, et cetera, which again, we've been pretty successful partnering with our community to get some of those things done. I don't know if you guys want to speak to that a little bit, or?
Sure, I'll add a couple things. So when we talk about wildfire mitigation, just to clarify, because sometimes that can be ambiguous, what we're talking about is a combination of landscape scale restoration efforts. Like it's really cool because a lot of the times, the majority of the time, habitat improvement projects are the same thing as wildfire mitigation. So, the burn that was up on Sunnyside, that was fully done under the Aspen Sopris Wildlife Habitat Improvement Project. And we were able to be a part of that because we saw the benefits in the wildfire risk reduction side. So the combination of doing the landscape scale with also helping our homeowners, the infrastructure of our community also do things that we know can drastically reduce the risk of wildfire. FEMA, off the top of my head, FEMA says that the return on investment for doing mitigation is a 6-to-1 return as compared to doing, after the fact restoration, after a disaster. So we know that there's a strong return on investment, and from studies that are out there at this point, some of these really basic, like, do these 5 things, clean your gutters, trim your hedges, X, Y, and Z. By doing this really basic list of recommended measures, we can reduce the likelihood of losing structures by around 75%. So we know pretty straightforward, these are our priority areas as guided by the Pitkin County CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We know what the areas are. We know how we want to address them. We know the areas of our community that we are, most concerned about, where our values at risk are, our critical infrastructure, our water sources. And this would be the mechanism that helps us get something done, before it's a disaster. So we don't, see a Marshall Fire happening in our community.
That's very true.
And I'd just like to mention too, if I could, the sales tax initiative that we're potentially looking at doing, that would also have the tourists and the people coming in town to actually use a lot of our service to help pay for some of the services and really help shore up our funding mechanisms. As you probably all know, 99% of our income is coming through mill levy, through homeowners and taxes. So this will really help stabilize our funding going forward.
Probably not 99, but pretty close to that.
Most of it.
For sure. Definitely the majority. And I think, that's one of the reasons, we've spoken with Theron and other folks at the school as well, because I think we're all sensitive to the fact that keeping the aggregate sales tax rate low is a priority for all of us, right? It's not like we're up here having not thought through this, but one of the issues that we're dealing with too is as the formula continues to change and there's this continuous downward pressure on property tax, it just becomes less and less reliable. And historically, that hasn't been the case, right? That's been relatively stable. And but now we're sort of beholden to actions that can come last minute or even after last minute from the Front Range that really impact how we can, plan, making it very difficult to plan strategically. So I think for us, one of those goals is diversification of revenue. Another piece that, Ally talked about, and this kind of segues or ties in well with the mitigation stuff that we're currently working on, is even if we do end up going to ballot with these, and if they are successful, we won't see any of these revenues until partially through next year, and then even say the bond itself doesn't even go into effect until 2027. So these are longer term things. We're still trying to get stuff done now because we know we're behind the 8 ball. We need to get ahead of things, and we're trying to get stuff done today. So we've been working really hard with the city, the county. We've had talks with SKICO, ACES, AVLT. We're working with a bunch of our different cooperating entities because as the fire district, the only land we own is what some of our fire stations are on, not even all of them, as you guys are well aware of. And so we're trying to find a way to encourage folks to do it and even do some projects that aren't just done on public land, right? That are done on public that could be an example for a private landowner to say, okay, I could do this on my property, and as a community, we can solve this problem. I spoke with Pete about this a little bit earlier today. We have been working really close with the city parks and open space folks, and we're talking about some priority spots underneath the Castle Creek Bridge or near that that we'd like to be working on right away. We're trying to line up contractors to do some of that stuff this summer, if that's possible. And then beyond that, we expand down to the ABC North 40 Burlingame. We're doing some stuff up at the water treatment plant. And this is stuff that initially we're talking about the initial funding potentially coming from the Wildfire Foundation or from specific donors. I know that we have a specific donor for the water treatment plant. But these are things that as we move forward, without committing at anything today, I'd like to ask that you would consider potentially partnering with us on those things, especially if they're on city land, to get some meaningful stuff done. Again, there's no secret here, right? There are prescriptions that can be written that say, if you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. And we can make an impact, and especially if we prioritize a couple of those very public-facing areas, I think we can also kind of put up some billboards for people to see that, oh, actually, this isn't bad. This is better than it looked before. And there are, it's, most of these projects have historically been done for wildlife benefit. They also have fire reduction benefits as well. And to be clear, this doesn't make it so that wildfires are completely no issue. They just make them manageable. We're talking about taking the flame lengths from excess of 50 feet down to under 8 so that we can actually be effective with them with fire trucks and personnel and aircraft. And that's what these treatment projects are aimed
Right.
at.
It helps keep firefighters safe, like it creates the safe space for firefighters to actually do their jobs effectively. And as an added benefit, home insurance companies have told us that they actually really do take community involvement into consideration when writing or denying policies. If there's two comparable communities and one of them has community involvement and the other one doesn't, they will pick the one that has community involvement to underwrite, which I found fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any other comment, or we'll see if there's any questions at the table? John?
I have some comments. This is really timely. My daughter's in Wisconsin right now, and she can barely breathe learning how to water ski because of the smoke coming down from Canada. And the smoke that we're experiencing here, we've got a fire that closed down Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park. We've had a fire that burned down the Grand Canyon Lodge on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, which I've stayed on that property, and I'm sure those people said to themselves, it'll never happen here. Just like the people in Lahaina. I stayed in a lodge there that also burned to the ground, and I'm sure those people thought it would never happen here. Ruidoso and Jasper were also affected by big fires last year, and just last week after the flash floods in Texas, Ruidoso got hit with a flash flood that killed 3 people, 2 children. Houses were being carried down Main Street in the floodwaters, just like Texas, but a state away. And I don't want to be one of the officials that are called out after a disaster happens, like they are being in Texas, because they were repeatedly asked for warning systems and sirens down in Texas, and they were always told there wasn't enough funding. So I don't want to be on that side of things, and I am going to support funding for fire preparedness to the best of my ability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and those mudslides, that's also a post-fire hazard consideration for our town as well. So thanks for thinking about that.
Yeah. Let me just say, I think we all have strong feelings about the needs for all 3 of these. We were not going to be taking positions per se on this. I will say I was in Gunnison to catch the smoke right over there Thursday and Friday with the Black Canyon fire. But we'll be just, and you guys are putting your own ballot on. We don't have any say-so about it. I think our memo did talk about a concern that is there about what our possible aggregate sales tax will be with all of these items all on the ballot. And it's one of the things that you can say we lean towards the luxury market more so now than ever before. And at the same time, one thing Aspen has always had is high repeat guests, people who come back again and again. And you'd hate to start losing your next generation of repeat guests because they felt it was just too expensive. But I also know other people who say, they'll pay for it, who cares, it won't matter. And I'm torn in between. I mean, it's not something I control or don't control. We do have some questions on the school district, but you guys will be making your own mind up as to what is best for your public mission. And the one thing that really has struck me, though, of course, is that the new big, beautiful tax bill has increased the state and local tax deduction that people can take when they're a property owner. But I've never known anyone to successfully take the sales tax deduction instead of property and taxes as a deduction on their property. So it used to be that, you could pass a ballot issue by saying, hey, it's this much on your business, but or your home, but you can take a deduction with those monies off the federal income tax. But you're right, the state legislature has been changing the rules about how property tax is collected and how it's allocated and how it's counted because of the rising cost of homes here, because of affordable housing, and Colorado is known for having one of the worst tax schemes of any state in the country. You know, all the special districts, all the individual districts, all the RTAs and agencies, and you know, especially down on the Front Range, all the little homeowners associations that are also special districts. So it's just, there's been numerous committees put together to try to resolve it and simplify it, and it's never gotten anywhere. So I can't give you any heads up on that. Other questions or comments for the fire district?
I have a question. Thanks for being here. It's obviously an issue critical to our community. And what happens if you move forward, you put both of these on the ballot, and either both or neither, or one or the other don't pass? What happens then?
Yeah, that's a good question. And even in our presentation, we had a slide on that. But what I will tell you is that we're always going to be there. We're going to figure it out. Our fire department would look a lot different next year if these things aren't successful than what we hope it looks like. That would be a substantial decrease, especially if revenues remain as they're projected to be, relatively flat, and we see the reduction in the R.A.R. and the other assessment rates that we're anticipating. That would be pretty impactful to us. We've got some reserves, but I would say we'd eat through those pretty quick. We've also been able to allocate some money continuously toward housing, and I would see that potentially ending, which would, again, be unfortunate and not something we're trying to do. But as far as your basic services that you see every day, we're going to continue to show up, and we're going to figure out how to continue to serve the community in the best way that we have to. That's the reality. We would have to make some pretty substantial and tough decisions if these were not to pass. But again, I don't want to be a fearmonger or anything that, you know, things are going to be terrible and fall apart. I guess the biggest thing that wouldn't change is we wouldn't see the meaningful work that we want to do, right, for the community in that wildfire space that we really do want to push, right, including hiring potentially seasonal crews, additional project managers. I can tell you that Allie is kind of a victim of her own success in that she has completely overwhelmed herself and she needs help doing what she's doing. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
But, you know, the whole goal here is for us to, after the fire, to have a town to come back to. You know, not just surviving it, but really having a resilient infrastructure, so much so that, you know, afterwards our recreation and our buildings are not totally decimated.
Yeah, and I did attend the fire district presentation. They're having public presentations a couple weeks back on a Saturday. The one thing I'll throw in for you, which you forgot to mention, but you mentioned that presentation, was that you're not really just fires anymore. You know, you go to automobile accidents.
Yeah, so we're considered an all-hazard agency, meaning that regardless of the call, you call 911 and we go. And we are situated to respond to a multitude of things, right? From a hazardous materials incident to even certain types of terrorist attacks. I mean, we would be first on scene for those. Active harmer incidents, swiftwater rescues, technical rescues, vehicle accidents. We are really designed to be the first person that shows up on any of those. Now, some of those require a much more specialized response as time goes on. But we train our folks to do all those things. We also work in conjunction and in close partnership with the Aspen Ambulance District. As you know, we don't do patient transport. We provide some advanced life support, but they do the majority of that. And I would argue that that's a really, really effective system because they're hospital-based and they can focus on specializing in those areas when we have so many other areas to focus on. That even maintaining proficiency as we look for insurance ratings, et cetera, they want specific amounts of training, and speaking with some of the training officers from places that try to do both, they have a really, really tough time meeting the fire side standards because they also have to meet the EMS side standards. And here, we're giving both of those things in a very specialized way, which I think is of great benefit. And just to address what you said earlier, Mayor, you guys are right. Like, technically, we can go and do things on our own, but I don't want to do something that's not in partnership and in alignment with the goals that the city and the county and our other stakeholders have. So it's really important to us to get your feedback, and even if it's not public feedback, but you just want to give me a call later and be like, hey, you could do this better, then please do.
Okay, I appreciate that. And any other comment? Bill, being online, I kind of forget about you. Do you have a question or comment?
No problem. I'll never let you forget about me, but I'm all good. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, John?
Yeah, I did want to say I just would really like to see more fuel reduction and more of the prescribed burns. I think that would be really helpful for our community resiliency.
And I'll just mention, Rachel, as well, Mayor, as well, as, you talked about financial impact of the sales tax. What we think ahead, we look ahead at what would happen if there was a major fire, then we could have done something to help prevent it. The financial impact on the town and the county would be devastating, absolutely devastating. So we try to think ahead of, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So I think everything we're looking at here too, there's a lot we can do now, but there's a lot more we can do in the future to help protect the community, community-wide.
Well, we all appreciate all the hard work and all these agencies. So very good on that one. We'll let you guys go. Thank you so much for being here and talking to our public through Grassroots TV. And we'll just continue to perk along till end of August.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now we will be talking with the Aspen School District.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having us here. I would like to begin just with
Just introduce yourself.
Oh, I probably should do that.
That's
Man,
it.
doesn't need to. I'm Darren Mulberry. I'm the superintendent for the Aspen School District, and I brought a team with me. I have our very competent financial team here of Mary Rodino and Max Merolt, who will be doing the bulk of this presentation. I just really wanted to start with a sense of gratitude to the community of Aspen for what they've done since 2010 in funding the school district with a special tax rate, of what we've been able to do with that and what it's done to transform what the education looks like for the students that have been there for those years. Obviously, we are under the gun, as you can hear from many of the agencies that already went before us today, of trying to make those same incredible gains that we've had over those years of the help that we received from the city to help us from the I think what it was, the BS factor, Mary, that the budget stabilization factors that highly impacted most of the school systems in Colorado. I got to see that firsthand in a community that did not have those kinds of provisions, and we saw class sizes move from about 25 to 40, every special program gone. There was just it can be very tough not having a community that can do those sorts of things. So I just want to start with that gratitude there. And I know we're back again today, and we wanted to have a conversation with all of you, and we're going to be very brief with our notes on this because we want to give you plenty of time to ask some questions. We did have a chance also to take a look at a memo. We will love to explore that a little bit further today as we go through these comments. But we really want to have this to be a question answer session for this. And we've also took the time to meet with all of you ahead of time. So hopefully you had most of the bulk of your questions answered when we had those meetings. So Mary, Max, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Darren.
Awesome.
Turn it over to Max to get started.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having us. As Rachel mentioned earlier,
And you are?
I'm Max Merolt, controller and AHS alum, then also sixth-generation Aspenite. So this is a community I care deeply about. But anyway, so as Rachel alluded to earlier in the meeting, Colorado tax is a complicated subject, and so I have the honor of trying to explain Colorado school finance, which involves tax and a complicated funding structure. But anyway, I'll hop into it. So kind of the base funding for all Colorado schools is called this total program amount. And so this is an amount set in statute by the state of Colorado. And so it determines how much each school is funded and how much they should be able to run their school on. So it's based on a formula with factors based on at-risk students, cost of living of that district, and a lot of other factors in there. It's a pretty complicated formula. But kind of an interesting tidbit is Aspen is 67th out of 178 total districts, which definitely doesn't align with the cost of living in this valley and what we need to be paying our staff and our utility bills and everything like that. So there's clearly a disconnect with state legislation and kind of the funding we need to run our district. And so kind of on top of that, and Darren already mentioned it, it's the budget stabilization factor. So this came into effect after the 2008 financial crisis, and it was used to balance the state's budget. So they essentially didn't have enough money to fund public education fully. So they started taking funding away out of this total program from every district in the state. I will say the Aspen School District was one of the districts most adversely affected. We actually lost $23.8 million in funding from 2009 to 2024. So, I mean, that's almost our full year budget, so that's a lot of money. And then recently, this trend has continued, and so Colorado passed this new school financing bill. So the old one was in effect for decades, and so this is really new. And so this overhaul of the new formula actually adversely affects Aspen even more. So in that formula I was talking about earlier, they have a cost of living factor in there, and they actually capped that in this new law. And so that's really what hurts Aspen, because obviously we have, I think, the highest cost of living of any school district in the state. And so we're kind of poised to lose $5 million in our total program funding. Because of that new law. It's currently in the phase-in period, so we wouldn't see that full decrease in $5 million in funding until fiscal year 2031. But a lot of what we're thinking for this fall ballot is kind of preparing for that and really making sure that our schools continue to function the way we want them to and really perform at that high level. So beyond that total program funding, we do have a mill levy override, and so that's an additional tax. It's a percentage of that total program that voters can approve. The state of Colorado would never pay that. That's always locally funded through property taxes. It's currently at 25%, which was previously the maximum before this new funding formula got put into effect. And then our really only other sources of funding are the Aspen Education Foundation, which is a great nonprofit that supports a lot of our additional programming and kind of things that other public schools can't offer, and we're very grateful for them. Then the Aspen Public Education Fund, that's the Aspen sales tax you all are familiar with. And then the Snowmass Village Public Education Fund, which is structured similarly, but it's a property tax instead of a sales tax. And then we also do receive a small amount in state and federal grants, but kind of as some of the other presentations alluded to with the current federal government, those revenue streams are dwindling as well.
Okay.
So kind of looking at the current state of the Aspen School District from a financial perspective, I think looking at fund balance is probably the most helpful. So this is essentially like the stockholders' equity of a government entity. It's basically the reserves. And so right now, our operating reserve ratio is 7.4%, which means we only have 7.4% of our annual revenue in reserves. So that's kind of how you would weather a rainy day, such as COVID or another event like that. And so I kind of just wanted to bring this up to show where our reserve ratio is compared to some of the other government entities here in the Valley. And so, I mean, our 7.4% reserve is concerning, and kind of the reason we've gotten there is just because we've been so pinched on funding and trying to pay our staff as much as we can that we really just don't have any money to put into reserves.
And you'll notice on the side, Colorado Department of Education recommends that this be closer to between 20 and 30% with a minimum level of 10%. So we've risen from 6 to 7.4 from last year, but we still have a ways to go.
Yeah, and so kind of moving into our most current update, so we did just approve our fiscal year 26 budget. Luckily, we were able to give our staff raises of between 3.5% to 5%. This was really only achieved through a cost-cutting committee we put together and then also attrition cuts in our staffing. And so we really did a lot of work this year to right-size our budget and really try to tackle the expense side of our really inability to contribute anything to fund balance. And so that's how we were able to give out those raises this year and contribute a little to fund balance, but that's really just not sustainable if we want to continue the same level of programming we currently offer at the Aspen school districts. Our year-end financials for the fiscal year 25, which just closed on June 30th, will be ready in December. But our most recent audited financials had no audit findings and no material misstatements, so there's really not a fiscal management issue there. And then kind of just one interesting thing that I would like you all to know is, so I know that everybody experienced drastic increases in their property taxes in 2024. Kind of the way that Colorado state funding is set up, we actually didn't see any increase in our revenue from those increases. All that did was replace any funding the state did give us with local taxpayer dollars. So again, I mean, it's kind of just a pattern of inadequate state funding and really no representation for mountain communities and us in particular. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Mary to talk about some of the funding proposals we have that could really help be a local fix to some of these issues.
Thanks, Max. I'm Mary Rodino. I think I've met most of you. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Business. So we won't spend too much time on this graph, but we've been asked over the last few months, like, what can these potential ballot questions fund? Like, what can these revenue streams fund? And the point, I think the details are there for anyone who wants to look at them. But the point we really want to get across is, in general, it's not a pot of money that can partly be spent on housing and partly be spent on other initiatives. So there are certain revenue streams that can be used for day-to-day operations, which would include raises and things like that. And then there's capital spending, master planning, and then housing spending. So just wanted to point that out. So to just kind of talk briefly about what else we potentially have going on this fall, in addition to the sales tax piece that I'm sure we'll discuss, our board is considering several options. They will be talking about these options again in August when they reconvene after the summer. And the first one is the largest, which is our bond request. And that you can see at the bottom, we have a little chart on how this ask would affect the property taxes for a homeowner based on $1 million of actual home value. This is, each bond itself is one-time funding. And feel free to jump in, you guys, if you want to add something if I'm forgetting. But, we really recognize the need to make some progress on housing. Our board has been discussing this for a while. We currently own 98 units. And we have estimated current demand at 136 units, with 160 being closer to our long-term need. As employees retire, they tend to have owned their own homes. And as new employees come in, they are young in a lot of cases, and they haven't been able to afford those homes. So we'll move on to the next slide, number 2, which is the mill levy override that Max talked about. Because of the change in the school funding formula, which, by the way, only affects 6 districts in Colorado negatively, but because of that change, there has also been a change to what the state is allowing in the mill levy override maximum amount. So if voters approve, our mill levy override could go from 25% of our tax levy to 47%. And that actually makes up the roughly $5 million that we are standing to lose in the new funding formula that's being phased in now and holding us flat currently. So you can see, rising up to the 47% mill levy override, you can see the effect again of a taxpayer with a $1 million of actual home value.
Yeah,
I won't read all the bullet points, but go ahead.
Yeah, and one could only speculate what kind of drove this legislation. But kind of the increase to the mill levy override, in my opinion, was the state's way of moving it so that Aspen will always be supported by its local taxpayers rather than the state. Because as I said earlier, the mill levy override can only be paid by local taxpayers. So essentially, they reduce the amount that the state would really ever have to pay, even if our property values decline significantly, and moved it to a funding stream that they'll never have to pay for.
We also thought it was interesting that after about 15 years of a budget stabilization or BS factor, the year that that finally got down to zero is the same year that the state decided that Aspen School District would be locally funded by local taxpayers due to adequate resources. So is it a coincidence? I don't know. But it sure didn't help us to finally get that BS factor down to zero, and we didn't benefit at all. So just the next, go ahead, did you, sorry.
Quick question. What were the other 6 districts? Were they ski country counties
There
or?
were ski towns in there.
Yeah, I think it was mostly mountain communities, really communities with those high costs of living, because they did cap
It all
that
got phased out.
factor in the formula. And I think the whole goal was to try to get more local funding from property-rich districts.
And we'd be happy to follow up with the name of those districts. One of them's really large, as I recall, and they're losing, I want to say, 25 to 30 million. So, but we're losing pretty significantly in those 6 districts, so. So just quickly, our other potential ballot initiatives as being discussed by the board is the renewal and potential increase of the sales tax piece, which, as you know, is managed by Aspen Public Education Fund and their board. We work very closely with them. There are only 5 categories of expenses that those funds can be used for. You'll see that in one of the bullet points. So again, this is not, while that funding stream does fund positions, this is not a pot of money that we could, for example, just issue raises with. The second kind of counterpart piece to that is the Snowmass Village Public Education Fund. There's been a lot of discussion about how that one is structured as a small property tax mill. Both of these things are expiring in 2026. My understanding is, while these initiatives were created at a time to kind of help with the funding losses that were occurring around 2010, and hopefully would be a temporary measure, the Snowmass Village property or sales tax was already so high that that's why these two things look different, even though they came around about the same time. So voters typically would never see both of these items, they would see one or the other. And so just briefly, just a couple more points that we wanted to make. I think a lot of the conversation this came up with the fire district, you know, what does it look like if this doesn't pass, or what does it look like if this doesn't get increased? So if there were no renewal at all, obviously that would be the worst situation for us, but you know, if this were voted down completely, we are currently funding 32 positions, so potentially with $0 in this stream, we would lose those positions. That would equal about a 10% cut to our budget and about an 8% cut to Aspen Community School budget. There would be programmatic cuts and little to no annual raises for the staff that were not released based on the depletion of that revenue stream. And we'd obviously make no progress on our reserves. So the middle column is kind of where we are now. If there's a renewal, the current revenues are around $4 million, and we're currently funding all those things that I just mentioned we would lose, including a community program with ACES, with Theater Aspen, all of our IB trainings, dues, fees, and those things I mentioned before as far as 32 positions and funding for the community school. So if this tax went from a 0.3 to a 0.6, which, as you know, would be about double, or exactly double of whatever the annual income is, that's really the one general kind of spending allowance where we could maintain our staff levels. We could initiate a staff pay increase. As Max mentioned, the last probably 3 years, I think we've been able to squeak by with about a 3.5% to 5% increase for our staff salaries. But we've been hearing, you know, from those bargaining sessions that, you know, we really need to be able to afford things better in town. It would also be an increase in funding for Aspen Community Schools, so that would be about 16% of their budget if you just double it. And one thing that this district hasn't done, at least successfully in the last, I don't know, 6, 7 years, we're not sure. We've tried to go back and dig up. But a district should really have the ability to put aside some money every year for a capital maintenance fund so that we can do the needed maintenance on campus and not have to look to bonds every 6 or 8 years. And then we would be able to kind of restore some of the things we've been not able to provide recently, which would include some professional development for staff. And the last slide is just really a summary of kind of how these funds can be used. The renewal, just as a reminder, the renewal of the sales tax, or what we refer to as APEF, would be seen by City of Aspen voters. And same thing with the Snowmass Village voters receiving that item on their ballot. And then the bond issuance and the mill levy override. In some case, the bond is obviously a one-time funding, cannot be used for operations. And the mill levy override would be recurring. There aren't restrictions per se, but we know that that state funding is slated to drop off, and it would, at that point, it would really be just a replacement for that revenue.
Yeah, and I guess the way I look at it is the mill levy override increase is really a wash in 5 or 6 years once that formula's fully implemented. So that's really just preserving our current funding. The bond is just to provide our employees with housing and allow them to live in this valley. And then really the renewal of the APEF and the Snowmass Village Public Education Fund are our only mechanisms to try to get our staff pay to align with the high cost of living in this valley.
I just think, this bookends perfectly what the opening comments on this presentation were. We came to the city when we had the budget stabilization that had to occur from, and here we are again with a state funding formula that is inequitable to what we're going to be needing as a community going forward. When you hear what we have to do and where our staff is currently being paid in perspective to some of their compatriots around the state, we will not be able to maintain doing that in the future without having some sort of revenue stream that does this. And I think it's so important for everybody to understand. I know it feels like we're coming with multiple things that we're offering here, but when you see how we have to spend that money and how it's allotted into its particular buckets, it makes perfect sense as to why we have to do it the way that we're doing it. I think there's a huge expectation from the Aspen community for us to continue to offer the quality program that we have. I can assure you that nobody else is doing the things that we're doing for their children in comparison, like with our outdoor ed programming, with an IB school district. Mary, what's the,
Especially in a K-12
what's I love this stat, and I just want this group to hear this. What's the current cost of a private IB district right now to a private school?
So I did a little searching just to try to find counterparts of ours in the state of Colorado. And there are some high schools, obviously you all probably know that offer IB programming. But the only K-8 complete, IB school that I could really find, I found another one after we talked, but 2 private schools. And the first one had a tuition of $27,000 a year and the second one had a tuition of $32,000 a year. So our per pupil allotment from the state is, for the coming year, is just over $15,000.
I just want you to understand.
Have to carry out a similar curriculum to a private school level. And it's been successful. We're now IB for all, K through 12.
And there's a real expectation, I think, from this community to have that kind of programming available for the students that attend here. And there's been a great history of the Aspen School District being able to do just that for multiple generations of students, one sitting here. And we want to continue to be able to do this. We see the forecast on the horizon here, which is the fact that we will have a diminishing amount of money coming in without the mill levy override occurring. We would be ostensibly being cut by the state, or we'll be in kind of a stagnation format where we will not be able to either, if all of these things were not to pass, we wouldn't have the housing, we wouldn't have the raises, and we would be suffering from not being able to attract and retain the best teachers in the state, nor be able to house them. So we have a lot of needs that are pending here. And just to let you know, one of the things that was the biggest curveball from us this last year, and I've had this conversation with all of you before, so I probably should stop, but We had also a $800,000 increase in insurance this year, and I'm sure the city saw the same thing. And you can imagine the chagrin of this team spending how many weeks in expense reduction task force meetings to find out that every penny that we had saved was going to have to go into an insurance increase for our staff. So we still have those pressures, and we're looking at very likely another increase this year. So there are many things out there that are kind of portents of doom. So this is the rationale behind us asking for something that not just keeps us at status quo, but gives us the potential to thrive.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll make a few comments, and then we'll all have some comments. I think there's no question all these needs we're hearing are very, very real. And we're going to hear more in the future, given the cutbacks we're seeing at the state and the federal level, for all sorts of help. We're helping the Forest Service manage maroon bells already this year. We're hearing greater requests for food banks, for mental health facilities, things like this. I want to see the school district get the money it needs to function and to thrive. There's no question about that. I am concerned with we're just kind of growing on an inequitable program that was begun for the stabilization, because Snowmass did not want to see their sales tax go beyond a certain point. They did a property tax, and then Aspen does a sales tax, and now Aspen's going to potentially double their sales tax, and Snowmass may double their property tax, but Snowmass's property tax does not equate anywhere near to the same amount per pupil that are Snowmass Village residents versus Aspen Village residents. And it just gets me that we're not collecting sales tax from the top of the mountain, because it's not, it would be in the school district boundaries, but it's not in the city municipal boundaries. And we're not collecting sales tax from the Airport Business Center. And we know a lot of the kids at the North 40 and other communities and Annie Mitchell out there use the Aspen School District. And it just seems unfair that this sales tax is not being asked district-wide. Or instead of sales tax, we're not asking a property tax district-wide that could be funneled again through Education Foundation, as opposed to, what you already have with your mill levy override. And it is a lot easier to deduct high property taxes from your taxes than it is sales tax. And so that's really the challenge I see. As I said, it may be that something that our guests don't care in the future. We're tending more towards only the luxury guest, and then we're not the town that says everybody can afford to come here and there's lots of things for free. And we all try to say that, because you have to bring in your next generation of guests. It's not just always about who has come before, who's aging out. And so I do worry about that, but I'd love to see us be able to have the school district put something on the ballot in their entire district, and not this segregation of Aspen does this and Snowmass does that, and Snowmass puts in X amount per child and Aspen puts in Y amount per child. And the out-of-district schools, none of their agencies where they come from or their locales are really putting in anything extra at all. They're not in the property tax and they're not in the sales tax zone. So it's just hard to want to continue and embed more deeply what is somewhat of an inequitable program. And I know you've already been polling on this, and this is maybe just I'm the one who's concerned, but I have the history of listening to city councils debating decades and decades ago whether 0.45 would be too much for housing and daycare. Just so cautious about the sales tax ladder and what we have it for and what we can use it for. I literally don't know if this community is going to need a sales tax to be able to help fund and pull down as matching funds enough money for a second bridge for wildfire evacuation out of this town. I really don't know that, but we're going to be at a point, 10.35 if all these measures pass. And that'll basically end the sales tax tree. No one's going to be coming back and asking, then it's going to be like, are we creeping up to 11%? Is somebody going to have a new quarter and a new half cent that our community needs? This is the last of what Aspen can fund its community needs with, is essentially what combined everyone's asking for. It's not anybody individually. And again, I'd like to find a more equitable way to see the schools funded fully and completely, as we've all taken a great deal of pride in, and you do a great job with. And it's unfortunate that the state is looking at it this way. It's just, they should have let you go to 60% mill levy override or 75, I mean, that's the real issue, is you're here asking for someone else's funding stabilization because that's not there. So, I mean, are you planning on doing any lobbying with this legislative session to perhaps have that element changed?
Well, I can speak to that. We are members of the Colorado Association of School Executives, which has its own lobbying team that's been doing this. We've sued the state with Levada. We've done many things that and each time we win, by the way, yet the tax does not stay the same. Yeah, and it doesn't follow. And I think that they have to reprioritize money as they go through. And I understand, and trust me, I understand the convoluted nature of these funding streams and how they come to us. But unfortunately, that's just how the system has been designed. It was, I can assure you, when we came on board, it's not our system that we designed and we're just fixing. It's just something that we're working with and trying to figure out what would be best and how we manage it from here on out.
And we're such a minority in the total number of districts. And so, for example, in the new funding formula, it's, 178 total? Just 172 stand to gain money. So there weren't a lot of people protesting it. However, we are a member of the Rural Schools Alliance, as well as some of the other organizations Darren mentioned. And we have an online meeting every Wednesday, and they talked about it quite a bit, and they kind of wrestled with supporting it, knowing that there were several rural districts who were losing money. And they were the ones who lobbied and pushed for the hold harmless provision, which is helpful, except that when our revenues increase by zero, it means we have $0 to pay for any cost increases with. So it's helpful, but they felt like that was at least not turning their back. I don't want to speak for that alliance, but they felt like it was not turning their back on those 6 districts that were losing, but they couldn't really do anything more than get those districts held harmless with the cost of living change.
And so on the renewal and the request with Aspen, are you looking at a 5-year renewal? And the same with Snowmass Village?
Yes, and I was going to mention that I think there could be some options explored. I think that our concern about trying to, and I'm just speaking for myself, my concern about trying to explore options now would be that we don't have a lot of time, and the discussion at our board level was really to not let this ballot item wait until next year when it is a drop-dead decision at that point. So I think the due diligence of our district would be to incorporate a lot of the things that you all have mentioned and think about those areas that are, potentially undertaxed for whatever reason, looking into some sort of like special service tax, or, our board conversations really talked about how the other 2 items, the bond and the mill levy override, are definitely a burden to property tax payers. And there was some discussion about kind of spreading that out. So, could that be revised and looked at again for the future? Absolutely, which is why one of the reasons we're not asking to remove the sunset. We understand we have some things we should do.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I will turn it over to we have Bill's hand up. Thank you, Bill. We'll take you first.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice presentation. And Rachel, I really share all of the sentiments that you expressed. I'm deeply concerned about the total sales tax rate creeping up and up and up if all these things are passed. I didn't say much on the prior 2 measures because we don't have much of an individual say. It's ultimately going to be up to the voters, since both of those organizations have the opportunity to put that text question on the ballot in November, those text questions, independently without our involvement. But on this one, we do. And I've put a lot of thought into this, and I want to express what you expressed initially, Rachel, which is I want the Aspen School District to be successful and to produce thriving students with exceptional educations. I understand the critical importance of that for our community. But there's sort of two key points that I want to make here. Number one is I couldn't agree more with you about whatever happens, whether it's a property tax measure or a sales tax measure. I think that it should mirror the district boundaries, and not just the jurisdictional boundaries. I don't think that's fair. That doesn't sit well with me if it doesn't really mirror the district boundaries. I don't know all the legislation that allows or doesn't allow for that kind of thing, but it just doesn't seem fair and equitable to me if it doesn't mirror it as close as possible, or exactly, if that's possible. The second thing is really a question for the four of us in this case, and potentially with some input from our city attorney and Pete. Is should we be looking at our sales taxes, those that we have some oversight on, or those that we can refer to the voters for their input on? And should we be looking at them holistically and say, is it time to shuffle the deck? And should we be examining what our priorities are for our community? And can we keep the tax rate close to where it is today by reallocating some of these rates? Again, I don't know the answer to how that's done, or what we can have an impact on and what we can't, and what needs to go to the voters, what doesn't need to go to the voters. But I just wanted to bring up that question for food for thought is, should we be discussing that? Should we be looking at our other taxes and see if we can maintain the tax rate pretty close to where it is today? And I say that particularly as it relates to this early childhood education confluence proposal is, we, I think, are the only district, or maybe one of the only districts within their area that they're proposing that this be effective in, that already has a sales tax that goes to fund early childhood education. And while they say it may not be duplicative in effort, it's certainly going to be duplicative in taxation. So I'm just concerned about this tax rate creeping up and up and up. And the next thing we know, we have a 15 or 20% sales tax rate. And that's very, very punitive to those who live in Aspen full time and shop in Aspen. It'll give some incentives to do things, to spend your money elsewhere, which I don't think is healthy for our community in the long run.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bill. And I'll just add for the general public that it was about $300,000 in food tax refunds we did last year to our residents to try to ameliorate, and that has to come out of our general fund. That comes out of, quote, special projects or money we could use on other things to try to make it a little more livable for our residents who are here year-round and who occasionally like to spend money and find the sales tax pretty hard. I know you cited the statistic that about 57, maybe 60% of our dollars do come from tourists, but that means another 40% is paid by the locals. Pete, you had a response?
Just to respond to Councilmember Guth's question, if we do want to consider our current sales tax and kind of reallocate the uses of that, we do have to go back to voters for basically every single tax lobby, because they did have specific uses aligned in all of those tax questions. The only exception right now is the movement between childcare and housing, where we have the 0.45 that can be moved at the council's discretion. And I'm assuming potentially you wouldn't necessarily just stop at sales tax. You might also go beyond that boundary. You could go to lodging tax if that was the case. So I do think that there's a significant lift, especially at this time. You wouldn't be able to do that for a November question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think to Bill's question. The state of Colorado is 2.9%. That cannot go away. Pickton County is 3.6%, and I believe they share that back with the municipalities at some level based on where it's raised. And that's a much older agreement, but that supports the county general fund. We have the RAFTA 0.40, and then we have the city of Aspen at 2.1, and the city of Aspen Education Fund is 0.30. So the city sales tax is broken into the 1.5 cent in total, two different taxes for open space. And, I know it's kind of funny to hear people on the street starting to say, well, if we weren't protecting the environment so much and building all those trails and planning on the Lift 1A park, we could just lower our open space tax. Well, I think that's a pretty high community value as well. And so it gets really hard to I'd hate to see us starting to say, well, is it open space or fire district? Is it open space or schools, and kind of pitting one community value against another, I think is just detrimental. But I have heard questions along those lines. And, we just kind of are where we are. It's just kind of a question of whether there could be a shorter ask that would be replaced by a larger ask during a general election of some sort, whether we just go with this as it is. But it just, if this sales tax was the whole district-wide, including the Airport Business Center and the ski mountains up in Snowmass and Aspen, I think it could be a much lower sales tax ask. And, or if it was a broader property tax across the entire school district, it could be a lower property tax mill levy that's asked and still get you the same dollars of money. And so I just wish we'd all been working on it together as much as you've come up with your plans based on, your school boundaries and school legislation and all that sort of stuff. So I just don't know if there's time with the rest of July and August to take a look at that or not. But that's my comments. Christine?
2 questions. Thanks for being here and thanks for your presentation. I said this when we met at the district, but I'm sorry that you have to be asking us and voters for money potentially because the state is failing. One follow-up on that, the Supreme Court today had a ruling potentially on the Department of Education and dismantling the potential for that. How does that affect the school district?
I get regular updates, and I'm certain they do as well, from what is happening at the federal level and the impact it happens because every grant funding stream, every state allotment in what you wouldn't think are necessarily related agencies have impacts that are felt throughout the entire organization. So it takes a while for the experts to kind of figure out how that trickles down and what will be the direct impact to this. Typically, so far, I don't foresee any more money coming, would be my feeling from this. I would probably hedge my bets that it's going to go the other direction. So I just think that that's been the would you guys, we haven't had anything that has been.
We've been notified of reductions already for, some of you may have heard of like Title I, Title II, there's all the way through Title IV, and special ed funding. So those are primarily our federal funds. Title I, we were already notified that's being reduced by 40%, and we were notified maybe a month ago for the year that's starting, so staff's already in place, right? So that went, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but 77,000 maybe to 40 something. We're still waiting to hear on Title II, which is a smaller revenue anyway. And we've not heard about Title III as well. So those two, between them, we were probably getting maybe 40,000. Title IV, which is $10,000, we use that to pay for some low-income students' tests, IB, AP type things. seems to have been held in place. But the biggest question, which we haven't really been told anything on, would be our special ed funding that's federal. And that's a revenue stream of about $275,000. So it never pays for everything the district's students need, right? And those things are mandated by law. So if we lose significant federal funding in that stream, that will be really problematic. And to your point about if the department is dismantled, it's gonna go over to the control of the state. And that worries me because the state has shown over and over that our district, and this is my opinion, is not a priority. So I worry about those federal funds that would then be at the state level and how those would be allocated to a district that is perceived as wealthy.
And we have no idea what happens when those backfills start happening at the state level for the federal money in the other districts that will be largely impacted by them. I can imagine the state will be coming in with large amounts of money to kind of backfill what that looks, and how that impacts us, I have no idea.
Got it, thank you, that's gloomy.
It's not going to be good, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good.
And then one second question, sort of piggybacking off of what Rachel was asking, but just for information historically, why were the sales tax set up in Snowmass Village and Aspen and not countywide?
Gosh, none of us know, really. I mean, you've done a lot of research on this, so he would probably have the best.
I can speak a little to that. So both the Snowmass Village Public Education Fund and the Aspen Public Education Fund were created during the 2008 financial recession. And so essentially both were designed, and they were originally with the sunset because they believed it was a short-term drawback in funding. That's proved that it's not the case. There's been continued state legislation, like I went through, that doesn't support public education, especially for high cost of living communities like our own.
But do we know exactly why it wouldn't have been tacked onto a county tax, or even possibly like the other two entities are talking about going through the state?
Yes.
That I don't know.
As best I understand it, Snowmass didn't want their sales tax going above 10%.
Yeah.
And so they said, we'll help you out, we'll do a property tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so kind of to the question about setting a full district sales tax, and so based on current regulation, that would be impossible for us to do, just because the only way we're allowed to levy taxes is through that total program and mill levy override, and that's with the Aspen School District boundary. And so the only other ways we can make that work is looking at it from a county level or other municipality levels, but none of those levels align with our exact district borders. Picken County goes into the Roaring Fork School District. Obviously, the different municipalities don't cover the entire school district, so there's a lot of different moving parts there.
And any sales tax that, for example, like in addition to the county sales tax, in my understanding, would then also increase Snowmass Village's tax to even higher, which it's already the highest in the state. So we don't have taxing authority for a sales tax of our district like the other two groups mentioned. So I think the only way that we accomplish that obviously would be through a property tax, and because we have a very limited amount of district housing, we really need to work on that. So I think if it wasn't a year or a time frame where we were asking for those other things and then the mill levy override, which was kind of just pushed on us, I think we could consider something to realign that sales tax, but I don't see how it would be effective to put another property tax question on this ballot that already is asking quite a bit from taxpayers, property taxpayers. Just my opinion again.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Great question.
John, any questions?
No questions. I also saw the story about the Supreme Court making a ruling today that clears our current federal administration to gut the education department and what that means for us. But I think we've seen with the Forest Service cuts exactly how that's going to affect us.
Yeah.
It's going to
Pull the rug out.
reduce our options.
Shift the burden.
Yes.
Continually.
Yep.
Yeah.
The goal is to eventually have us pay for it.
So we'll just have to see where it goes from here. I don't see any other solutions coming forward at this time, and, you know, hopefully the voters would understand it's a 5-year measure, and that there would be further efforts to try to even that out or collect within the larger district in the future. I agree with you, Max. There's probably take a little extra work with some attorneys and bond counsel to decide how a first education foundation could be set up, that whatever revenues are raised via the boundaries within the county that are set would go towards the school district. But it's mid-July and probably a little late to get that all lined up. But it is going to be a crowded ballot, one way or the other, between the early childhood education, the fire district, the school district, and the bonding for potentially the airport, I think, is going to go forward, and the bonding for the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project. So, let alone state questions. And it's going to be interesting. It's an off-year election. Turnout's often very low for those sort of elections. So we'll have to work that hard to see a good result. Anything else?
You're back in 2 weeks to talk about.
We were kind of looking for direction. We
Right,
weren't
well, yeah.
sure if this is going to potentially have an action in July or August, or we don't know yet.
Well, I think we have a
Be here when you
meeting
tell us
set
to
up
be
in
here.
August.
We have a work session scheduled in a couple of weeks to circle back with the council on potential direction it would like to take for the November ballot.
Okay.
Did you want us here for that work session? You can let us know.
Unless you come up with a new proposal. I think
I
this
mean,
is
we're
what
happy to
this is
answer
what-
questions.
Now, the one thing I have wondered, are you planning on the renewal and the increase in the same ballot measure, or just a renewal question and then a separate increase question?
So it's my understanding
State
from
taxpayer.
general and our bond counsel that the ballot language becomes the city's decision. We do need to try to ensure that we definitely don't lose the revenue stream, which is in our discussions with you and Pete, our board has always had the discussion of putting this on this year, just in case. So
Then we have the option.
we feel like the plan B would be to go back next year to the ballot with potentially, just a smaller increase, but we'd like to, and that would only be if it failed. So we'd like to try to ask the voters. Theron has talked a lot about just wanting to ask the voters.
All we want to do is get it in front of the voters to see what they have to say about it.
So I think that our stance at this point is, we're looking to put the increase in front of the voters, and that does give us one more year to try to regroup if that's not successful. I don't know if that answered your question.
So renewal and increase in one question is how you would rather see it?
I think it.
I'm just trying to figure out who writes
It has
the
to be,
question
I
for
can
you.
kind of answer, I think what you're
Yeah,
asking,
I
it's
think
going to
it
be,
has to be.
it's phrased as an increase.
And, I mean, unless we've gotten some misinformation that was in our meeting with our councils, that it is one question, and we think that that might be why it pulled a little lower, because the way the question was written, which is complicated in Colorado, was with an increase of 9 million, but 4 million is already in place.
Right.
So if this moves forward, we'd love to have our council talk to your council about some discussion on how
that
the
can be
question is crafted, if possible, so.
Do you have a comment?
And then I don't want to get too far into the weeds
Yeah.
here, but I do think that the council has a lot of options on how the language gets crafted. There was some information in the memo about whether or not you wanted to do a sales tax. There's the option to do a City of Aspen property tax to kind of mitigate the impact of the sales tax rate, overall aggregate sales tax rate. So you could still do that and generate whatever tax revenue that the school district was either, searching for, or some level in between that the council might want to consider. I will also say you could just renew at the existing 0.3%. I'm just, looking at the fact that the mill levy override has no restrictions on its uses. So if you're going to collect an extra 5 million out of the mill levy override, and that kicks in starting next year, and the cliff doesn't fall off for 5 years or 6 years now, it's 2031, that's 5 million more a year that the school district is collecting through that mill levy override, going from 25% to 47%. So it does buy time for a district-wide kind of discussion and solution to be kind of worked through.
So I
So
would,
the
yeah.
formula does phase in, so we would only get $5 million of additional funding, and that would slowly whittle down to zero after that phase-in period.
And also, we have some reservations about giving a salary increase, something that compounds every year and adds in, when we don't have the funding in place for more than a few years. So yes, it would be, the mill levy override being implemented early is intended to allow us to get our reserves in a healthy situation. It's intended to allow us to build up some capital maintenance reserves to maintain the schools rather than needing a bond issue to really do, millions of dollars of work at a time. And healthcare cost increases, which we don't have a lot of control over, we need to build up some reserves that can be reserved for those kinds of things. So yes, the mill levy override would definitely be a revenue increase. We have had board discussions where, we have mentioned that we are concerned about being able to adequately increase our employee salaries as other entities have been able to do, because we would have a finite increase, if you will, without sales tax. So just wanted to mention that, and to Max's point, it's not a 5 million every year, it will phase in. Do we know exactly? Not really. So we're keeping an eye on all of it.
I think also, given where our fund balance is, we don't really have the luxury of being able to weather any kind of unpredictable expenses or funding anything recurring out of a one-time funding source.
Yeah, and, I hate to even have to say it, but the state is probably facing a $3 billion shortfall next year.
They are.
And so you never know where they're going to take that from.
The only thing positive I can say is that they're not giving much to Aspen School District now. So there's, other than the, again, my opinion, but other than the federal stream that you mentioned, there's not much more they can really take. I don't know, I can't even think of anything that they could put on the backs additionally of our taxpayers. It's that difficult. The pension fund, maybe, but so far that hasn't been mentioned, so.
Yeah, the only things I can really think of, there are things like, and I'm not tied to anything, it's like, what if you asked for a 0.4 this November, basically renewing the third, having a 10th more, and then plan on going in the general election of 2026 for a larger district thing or something like that. But I don't want to mess with your school budget. I know you guys have a back up against the wall. I just want to see successful elections one way or the other. And sometimes when you see so many on once, you can see them all pass or you can see them all fail, or people just pick one or the other and then you still don't end up with a good result. And so that's the nervousness I think we all have. Not with your hard
We
work
definitely
or
feel
not
the
with
same
your
way.
need.
For sure.
Our school board feels the same way too. Everybody's nervous about it, but I do think this one school, one vote idea has kind of percolated into some of the, we want to make sure that the community is very clear that we're going to try to get it all done in one package. And I think that's the rationale behind the board, and that's the rationale behind this team. So this isn't something that's a continuing stream of ask that comes over the
Have you
next several
thought
years.
of asking Snowmass a little more than just going from 500,000 to $1 million? That
I have now.
500,000 was not ever inflated, and it really,
Yeah.
again, on a per pupil basis, leaves Aspen, putting in 3 times as much as Snowmass, and so that would
We do
be-
have a meeting with them next week, and Max has done a lot of work talking to their administration as well. We felt like doubling it was, when you talk percentage-wise, it seems like a lot, but to your point, dollar-wise, it's much lower than the sales tax, so.
Yeah, and we are planning to ask to remove kind of the fixed amount with that, so it at least
Sure.
grow with property valuations, assuming they keep appreciating.
Thank you. All right, well, I think.
Thank you, sorry we
No,
took so much of your
it's been
time.
great. And
Thank you,
again,
guys.
this is for us, this is for
Thank
the
you.
public, this is for all of us to think about future years as much as this November.
Well, thank you so much.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't see any further comments from Bill. So, okay, let's just take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll go into the demolition permits. Appreciate that. welcome to our Grassroots TV audience. It is Monday, July 14th, and we are tuned in to the work session of the Aspen City Council. We are now going to discuss our demolition allotment program. So we have Ben Anderson here from Community Development to lead us into this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Again, for the record, Ben Anderson, Community Development Director. In 2022, I was part of the team who responded to the moratorium. This was a policy that came out of work that myself and our team sort of engaged in, and so I've been involved with this program since its inception. And so for those who have concerns about the program, certainly I have a responsibility for this. And the purpose of the work session this evening is to try to arrive at some signaling of council majority direction on potential code changes to the demolition allotment program. I'll talk a little bit about this kind of in next steps, kind of at the end of the presentation, but the previous council asked for some changes to the program. We had at least a single significant work session and a couple other kind of less formal discussions. We passed a policy resolution opening up the land use code. So that step in a potential amendment process is already complete. But when we sort of had conversations with the previous council, it was pretty clear to me that we didn't have a majority position on potential changes to the program. And so the purpose of this evening is to come back to this new council. Certainly this council, members of this council have raised questions about the program, made suggestions about potential changes. And so it's just to kind of go through the kind of current status of the program, but ultimately to arrive at council majority position on how staff might respond to council desires for potential amendments to the program. So it's going to move forward. There we go. So I think it's pretty clear to everyone that this program ultimately came out of, it was one of the central policy provisions of the response to the moratorium in 2022, Ordinance 13. As we talked with council, as we talked to the community and the outreach that we were doing, these are the statements that sort of came to fore. Some of these were included in memos at the time. But it was a feeling that this type of development, or redevelopment as the land use code describes it, was really the development type that was driving a lot of the feeling at the time that things were not meeting the AACP, not meeting community members' expectations about what was happening in their neighborhoods. And, I think we've seen this in neighborhoods all over town, modestly sized and constructed older homes being replaced with much larger and more complex new homes. There was obviously conversation about the landfill, obviously conversation about intensity of construction activity in neighborhoods. We made some other code provisions responding to the fourth bullet point on employee generation impacts. And then lastly, we did a lot of work in response to this last one of thinking about the carbon impacts related to demolition construction and long-term operations and maintenance of redeveloped single-family and duplex homes. So why did we land on this program as a response to those things? We heard a lot in our outreach, we heard a lot from comments at the council table during the moratorium conversations, that this type of development seemed to be happening much more frequently with increasingly significant impacts. When we looked at the data, sort of in the lead up to the moratorium years, we were starting to push at 13, 14 demolition permits a year through our building department and the permit process. People were feeling those projects in their neighborhoods. We looked back long-term, and that number over about a 10-year period was more around an average of 6, but when I think the moratorium was considered, people were feeling, I think, the impacts of this increase in demolition allotments. We also looked at other alternatives, things like floor area reductions, permit quota systems, reductions to mass and scale. Those seemed to staff at the time that those conversations were going to be even more acrimonious, were going to be more divisive within the community. And we decided that this demolition allotment program aligned with very long-term provisions within the growth management quota system and felt that that perhaps was a path that would respond to the problems that were identified and also not take away floor area reductions that at the time were, we were talking about numbers at $3,000 a square foot in Aspen. That number is probably another 50% higher than that, sort of when we look at real estate values across the city. And then lastly, we were concerned about other things, energy efficiency at the time, construction demolition waste. We wanted improvements to stormwater treatment. We wanted better data out of these kinds of projects, and the demolition allotment program, as it was designed, responded to those things. So we built this into the already existing growth management quota system. Other than create a new type of development that was considered under the allotment system, we did not change growth management in response to this. And we felt that this purpose statement that had been in growth management quota system, chapter 26470 of the land use code, which had been around in one shape or form since the late 1970s, that the purpose statement that was there aligned with this type of development. Can talk about any of those points if you desire, but that's in the sort of introductory paragraph to growth management that's been there for probably a couple decades at least. The program came out of Ordinance 13, Series of 2022, the moratorium response. I think this is really important to think about because I think for a long time, we have not been using the growth management allotment system. The previous types of development, new multifamily, single-family residential development, commercial development, lodging development, we really, for the last 10, 15 years, have not been using those allotments. And so I think part of the discussion that happened during the moratorium was that the community was feeling this intense pressure of what was happening, but the system that we created to kind of manage and throttle the pressures of those growth weren't being used in any way, shape, or form. So what was it? So we used this system that had been in place for a long time, but we created this new type of development that would be subject to the allotment system. And I think it's important, I think some of the response to the program, at least the staff has felt it, is that I think the community to a large degree has forgotten what this program, how this program used to operate, where on an annual basis, it was contentious. Programs were competing with each other. Projects did not get allotments and had to wait. Projects had to propose additional qualities that would allow them to qualify for a multi-year allotment. Those things used to be a regular, if you look back to Planning and Zoning Commission meetings from the 1990s, those were conversations that were happening at nearly every meeting with one project or next, and we hadn't been doing that for a long time. So I think when this new development that is really important to our real estate context in 2022, 2025, we have forgotten that concept of growth management used to be a really regular and often contentious discussion that the community was having. And so we haven't had those for a while. And so I think the implementation of this program was a shock to the system to some degree. The program, we did not change any of the way that the program worked. The allotments that were available allocated annually. There were options in the code when all allotments have been issued and are available. Council was the body that would review these things in assessing options when allotments weren't available. And the three-year expiration period of the allotments remains unchanged as well. The basics of the program, as passed by council in 2022, there were 6 allotments available per year. There was a fair amount of discussion about what this number should be. There was a discussion of 8. There was a discussion of a lower number. We landed on 6, which had been a roughly 10-year average leading up to 2022. Council, staff did not recommend the addition of long-time local allotments. Staff has difficulty, I think, evaluating who qualifies as a longtime local, what that means to be a local. And council wanted to make acknowledgement of folks that have been in the community for a long time, that have owned their properties, that have served the community in different ways, and added an additional 2. I will just say that staff then sort of responded with, if council wants this additional provision, we're going to have council be the sort of deciders about who qualifies. And so when you had those conversations at the council table, that was an intentional sort of outcome of deciding on long-time local qualifications. I will say that the program was designed as a fully administrative process, if allotments were available. Staff wanted it to be a low burden both for staff and also for applicants. Administrative processes are much more timely, and so the program was designed to be administrative in nature. Available allotments at the beginning of the year are now subject to a lottery. I will say one of staff's regrets about the program is that we started it with a first come, first serve at the beginning, and some aberrant behavior by one of our representatives for, I think, 7 of the initial sort of allotment applications, sent 400 emails to us for those 7 applications, and it really messed with the program, I think, at its inception. That's, I would say staff has that as a regret, that we weren't more thoughtful about that specific element of the program. We did change that to be a lottery program moving forward. If applications are received and no allotments are available, a denial is issued. And GMQS, for a long time, again, has then provides an appeal process. And this becomes council review. I put appeal in quotation marks there because I do think that one of the things that council has observed is that projects, when they've come forward from appeal, are bringing legal counsel with them. And staff, when we have an appeal, we don't see it as an adversarial response by an applicant. It's a code provision. But I do think that addition of legal counsel to these has taken additional administrative burden of our city attorney's office and of our staff. I think also of the applicant, additional cost to the applicant. But I don't think that appeal, which the criteria are pretty straightforward and pretty basic, again, I think applicants have responded with bringing legal counsel, and I do think that it has added additional sort of time and cost and burden both to staff and applicants. I'd be happy to answer any questions to this point if folks do.
Well, I was going to just ask for the record, because I had sent you an email today. Do you have a count of how many homes are currently under construction in Aspen now?
Yeah.
And your response was, there are 74 major residential projects remain open for 23, 24, and 25 issued permits. Not a precise number, but it paints a picture.
Yeah. It was a pretty quick turnaround to that response. I'm pulling data out of our Salesforce program.
I understand, it was a last-minute ask.
And some of that's not precise. When I say open, it could be that those projects are completed but haven't received a full certificate of occupancy. So, I'd have to go do some additional work to try to understand that. I will also say that just because of the nature of things in our development context, there's probably some 21 and 22 permits that are still open and under construction, but I didn't include those in the query. So for the last 3 years, issued permits that are still open, roughly 74 projects.
Thank you. Anybody else had any questions at this point? John?
Yeah, I had one that I've asked before, but some time has gone by. Has any long-term local that has applied for a demo permit been denied?
No. Eventually, no. Since 2022, and this is the next slide, only one application that pursued an allotment has not received an allotment. That was a person who applied, participated in the 2024 lottery when there were 4 slots available. They did not receive one of those allotments and have not pursued one of the other mechanisms in response.
And of the all the parties that have appealed and gotten their demo permits, how many of those have broken ground?
So let me just go through these numbers real quick, and we can talk a little bit about how this breaks down.
Thanks.
Since 2022, 35 demolition allotments have been issued in total. Of this number, 8 have been issued to longtime locals. 14 of the allotments have been issued building or standalone demo permits. So of that 35, 40% roughly, have started a process, have gone through the permit process, have been issued those permits. To my understanding of the first 2 years of the available allotments, only one of those projects has not yet been issued a permit. That allotment expires this December, so I anticipate receiving a submission at some point before then, perhaps, to give you some sense of how things are proceeding.
That does, thanks.
In terms of, the kind of current status of available allotments, all 2025 allotments have been issued. Only one 2026 regular allotment has been issued. Both of the 2026 longtime local allotments have been issued. A small number of pre-apps have been provided in 2025 that have not been acted upon yet. We've got a couple, I've got one application in, a couple other that are probably on their way in sometime in the near future. But I will say by this time last year, we had already granted all of 25s. So we'll see how this plays out, but it does seem that the demand for these have slowed down a little bit.
Good to hear.
Question on that. Why would someone go for a long-time local allotment for next year when there are spots available in the regular allotment program?
I think it was a decision, it's really up to city council about how they want to respond to those requests. I think the intention when the program was created was to have the regular allotments filled first, regardless of who was asking for them, and then come back for those additional 2 as necessary. I think the sense I have from some of the recent conversations, and I think some of the conversations that the city attorney office has had, that we have filled those in order to keep the regular open kind of over time. I will say in the previous years, prior to 26, the regular allotments have filled first and the longtime locals have kind of filled second. And I think just in response to a couple of the more recent requests, I think there was a desire just to go straight to the local allotments with the others remaining open and available.
Okay.
But that's fully at the discretion of city
questions
council.
from Great, and we'll just continue. Thanks for letting us ask mid-presentation
That's
questions.
fine. Please interject it at any moment. So this is where we really get into the nuts and bolts of things, and I'm happy to sort of go through the end of this, or we can have conversation on each slide. Based on things that have been said at the council table, certainly based on things that we've heard out in the community, there's some strong feelings about this program, both in support, but certainly in critique of the program. And so these first 2 questions, I think, are kind of a binary question that I clearly don't think that we had a majority of council on either one of these questions with the last council. But the first question is, should the program status quo be maintained? Certainly I think, and I already spoke to the sort of lottery issue, I think there's probably aspects of the program that, staff probably would have done differently with hindsight. But in general, I think staff looks at the program. I've talked significantly with the city attorney's office about this, and ultimately I think we are, staff thinks that the program is working as it was designed. Whether or not people support the reasons for that program, or continue to support the reasons for that program, or agree with staff that it's sort of translating into outcomes as it was designed, I think that's up to council and the community. But ultimately, I think there's a question of should the program status quo be maintained. In that case, we don't do any code changes. I think on the other side of that equation, there's certainly voices at the council table that have suggested the program be eliminated in its entirety. I've certainly heard that from members of the community. And so if there is a majority position and affirmation of either of these paths, we can stop here. I think in case of the status quo, we leave the program as is and leave the code as it is. But if there is a majority sort of desiring to eliminate the program in its entirety, that's also a fairly straightforward code change that staff can pursue. We can talk about these two questions now, or we can leave it to the end. The next set of slides follows the discussion in the memo, identifying areas in which I have heard council and members of the community suggest possible areas of amendments to various aspects of the program. And so, again, I can go through those. We can stay here and see how you folks want to respond to this, or we can wait till the end of the slides and you can have those conversations sort of in totality at the end.
Yeah. Bill, I see your hand up, but we're going to hold off for a second or two on this. So your third question is really, should the program be modified?
Modified in some way.
In some way. And so those are the three questions really in front of us. I think we've all read through the memo. There were a number of specific potential discussions of modifications that could be considered if we see desire for improvement. I'm going to go ahead and take Ben's lead and ask, should the program be eliminated entirely, as a simple yes or no question across the board? And Bill, I'll call on you first to make your comment and whatever other thoughts you'd like to add to that.
Thanks. I'd like to ask Ben a clarifying question based on something he just said before I answer the questions directly, which I can certainly do. But Ben, thank you for your work and the presentation so far. I actually hate the fact that you have to spend your time on this program, but that's because you know how I feel about this program. Towards the end of your presentation, Ben, you just said that it is your opinion and staff's opinion that this program is working as designed and that it's producing desired outcomes for the community. Could you please elaborate on that with specific data points and examples of how it's producing desired outcomes for the community and how it's working as designed?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the program was crafted to ultimately be a throttle on this type of development. I think with projects of this type going straight to building permit, I think there was not a lot of consideration within the speculative real estate market, within homeowners, about the impacts that this kind of development was having on our community. Certainly there's process involved, but I would argue that in alignment with sort of other things that the city of Aspen regulates, these kinds of projects are impactful in a whole lot of different ways. And I think, as has transpired over the last, years since this program has been established, I think that we're getting to an average distribution that tracks with, what we were experiencing prior to that. I will also say, some of the things that we put in place, and I will say, and I didn't talk a ton about this in the memo, but when someone gets one of these, they're subject to what we call the residential redevelopment design guideline, or the design standards, RDDS, which, again, needs to be updated right now because we've made some changes since that was created. We've put in place a really important construction and demolition waste ordinance that these projects that receive these allotments were subject to. We've got a really bomber energy code, and new buildings are now, with a code adopted since the passage of this program, are some of the most energy efficient homes in the country per square foot. I will also say that we're starting to see some data out of these projects that were required, and we will be getting data from these projects moving forward as more of them come online. They're required to participate in the sort of the Building IQ program and the benchmarking out of that so that we understand the actual energy use of these things. We're starting to get some data about the embodied energy in the deconstruction materials and also the new construction materials so that we have some understanding related to the argument that new homes are inherently more efficient than old homes when they go through a demolition program. We don't have comprehensive data on that, but we hope to as more of these programs come online. So whether or not that's a sufficient answer, Councilmember Guth, I think it's a fair question. And, in total, if there's agreement on some of the things that council was trying to get at during the moratorium process, I feel like this program in some ways is responding to that.
Thanks, Ben. And so of the things you just elaborated on, C&D ordinance has been passed. You talked about embodied carbon reporting and enhanced building codes. I think those are really the three key points. Could all those things happen without the demo allotments specifically?
Yes, one of the the sort of areas that are in the slides coming next do suggest that, and I think I mentioned this option in the memo perhaps is, maybe an option is getting rid of the program entirely and making redevelopment requirements standardized that are much more rigorous and restrictive in some ways. And so in that case, we could make an argument that without the demolition allotment program, certainly we could build a provision in either the building codes or in the land use code related to certain kinds of development that kind of reporting would be necessary, sort of outside the allotment program. So again, you have full agreement from me that there are some things that have happened since this program was built. One, I'd say that this program was the impetus for those changes in some ways, but I'd also say that they have responded very directly to some of those things. So I don't have any disagreement that we've made some moves that respond to some of those challenges that were identified by council at the time.
Thanks. Okay, so and for perfect clarity, all three of those things could continue to happen with maybe some minor code language changes or something if the demo allotment program specifically was eliminated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And I did not hear you cite any specific data about how the number of demolitions, the volume of construction, the intensity of construction, the impact on neighbors, the cost of real estate, any statistics of that sort have changed in any way or in any measurable way since this program has been adopted. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I will also say that there's not a certificate of occupancy that's been issued for a single one of these projects. So in terms of project timelines, in terms of length of construction of projects, in terms of, none of those kinds of data sets have been formulated yet. The only two projects that have, to my knowledge, really come out of the ground in their mass and scale and their form understood are 212 Cleveland and 433 Gillespie, both of which are still in construction, both of which still have construction fences around them, both of which are probably some ways away from having a certificate of occupancy. So a lot of the data that you're desiring, which I think we're desiring as well ultimately, are that the projects that have resulted from this program are mostly haven't materialized to completeness yet.
Yeah, fair enough. My sort of anecdotal experience has been that we're synthetically accelerating demolitions through this program, not slowing things, not reducing the intensity of construction, not reducing the pace of development, not, to use your word, Ben, throttling anything. Yeah. I just don't think the desired effect is happening at all, and that's why I'm so opposed to this program. So, I mean, thank you for all of your answers. Before I answer your question, I'm just going to say, hey guys, tweaking this program is like spending millions of dollars to invent a better mousetrap that catches the same number of mice. It's not accomplishing anything, and it's coming at great cost and great anxiety and great stress. We've put in place these programs that Ben mentioned and discussed that we can continue to maintain. I'm not opposed to any of those. What I am opposed to is this sort of very challenging synthetic system to determine who gets the right to tear down a house and who doesn't, who's worthy of it and who isn't, with no measurable results. And I don't think they'll ever be measurable. I don't think we'll ever be able to isolate the cause of any changed patterns in demolitions to this program. I think the economic forces will have far greater of an impact on demolition pace than this program ever will. I think it's a drastic mistake to maintain this program. I'm not in favor of maintaining the status quo. I think the program should be eliminated. I urge all of you to consider doing the same. We can have great programs about redevelopment standards in our community without making people jump through senseless hoops that accomplish nothing. And please don't take any of this as a personal criticism, Ben, or the rest of the staff. I just don't think that this program has accomplished its desired outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Let's go across the rest of the council and ask that kind of fundamental question. Should the program status quo be maintained or eliminated entirely? Just if it makes it easier, I'm maintained, but I can see several tweaks I'd like to take a look at. Sam?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go and eliminate entirely, but I'm obviously willing to compromise if there's not a third member who's willing to do so. I just wanted to get my word in to try to convince others as far as just like, we heard the question of was this program done? We talk about throttle or impactful or data. Is that really worth messing with people's lives and livelihoods? The amount of people that we've come in here, especially longtime locals, I feel like the reason this program exists beyond like the overreaction during the pandemic, which I respect, and the well-intentioned manner of it, is it attacks the people that people feel like need to be attacked, the real estate development community, demolition being a dirty word, redevelopment being a dirty word, but it doesn't need to be that way. The city is a huge developer. Development is not always a bad thing. And if we put reverse psychology beside, I feel like, once again, if you look at the pros and con list of what this is, it's just not needed. Ben just said we can have everything that is the positives without the negative. If you eliminate this in program entirely, we can still work on the throttle, the impactful nature of this, and collect data. So why do we continue to keep doing this? We have a strict environmental friendly building code. We have a waste diversion program. You just don't need it. We have people coming in like stressed to the max, hiring consultants and lawyers, worried about their largest asset in life not being able to sell at the price it needs to sell at. You have longtime local families advertising in the newspaper, got that demo permit. I really thought and always believed that this council was against commoditization of Aspen, but was more for community of Aspen. And this program very much enhances the commoditization of Aspen. And I feel like if you put aside the fact that it has this vibe to it, that it's just evil real estate development and that we're attacking billionaires, what this program does more than not is attack longtime locals. And it's really disappointing that it continues to go on without really much defense to it, because the defense I heard is just like generic statements when we have had the impact, the negative impact, come from the people that are applying for these things. And I think it also is proven at this time, once again, that we have everything we need to move forward and get all the positive impacts. And when you look in hindsight, hindsight's always 20/20, this was done during the pandemic when 20 people applied for it in 1 year. overall, it was a six times a year average. This is not something that needs to be regulated. And the fact that we've gone towards waste diversion in a enhanced building code says that there are things we can do on the flip side of this after eliminating it to get what we want out of the program, but the program just does not work. And saying that you want to keep it, I would love to hear that defense as to why, because I've never actually heard it explained well why this program still exists when all it seems to do is hurt the longtime locals that come and apply for it. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Oh, and lastly, when they do come and apply to it and they just tell us their whole life story, the plot is lost being like, what's this program for? We have it so people come apply. They come with a PowerPoint presentation since like birth of living in Aspen, just to like, you know, tug at our heartstrings if that's what this program is about. It's really lost the plot, and it's another reason why eliminating this program would just be better to the longtime locals in our community while addressing the things we're actually trying to address more directly.
Thank you. John or Christine, who would like to go first?
You've been on this program longer than I have, so I'm interested in hearing.
Okay, so a couple things. I do think COVID may have been a factor in this program, but it wasn't responsible for it. COVID happened in 2019 and 2020 for the most part, and this was enacted in 2022. I really feel that, again, this project is mostly born out of frustration of the people who were sitting at this table at that time, listening to constituents' complaints about the unending construction, development, redevelopment, whatever you want to call it. I personally have lived in several different places in the West End, and it's nonstop in the West End. Some of our community members do not live in the neighborhoods where this nonstop construction is taking place. I do not feel the program should be eliminated. I agree with staff that eliminating this program now would be premature since we haven't collected any data on where this program is going. People seem to get their demo permits and just sit on them. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, right now it feels like, as Ben has pointed out, this program is actually gaining some equilibrium, and I do see benefits to this program. Would I like to see some tweaks? Possibly, but I don't think eliminating it now with some backup plan would be a wise way to go. I think, again, this program was initiated for very good reasons. It is working, if imperfectly. And as far as tweaks go, I am open to making some tweaks, modifying the criterion for longtime local, lessening the years lived in it, et cetera. And I would also be open to making changes to allow for more construction and demolition waste diversions. But I can't see eliminating this program at this point.
I want to ask just one question. I've meant to in between, but in the memo you referenced some of the cost of applying, and you mentioned that a survey. Is there a survey needed even if there wasn't an allocation program, but someone was applying for a demo permit?
Yeah, an updated survey is a requirement for really any building permit that requires exterior work on a property, just to make sure that things that are being torn down aren't on somebody else's property, that we understand kind of the interaction of the structures on the property to easements and other things that might be present, so that we're making sure that what's transpiring, at least in the demolition. So it's an expense. Sometimes it's up to $5,000, which I'm not suggesting is insignificant. However, for any kind of exterior work.
It would be required for any demo permit,
Ultimately,
whether we had an allocation system or not.
For
Okay.
a demo permit, it's required.
That was the one thing I wanted to kind of clarify. And there would be some amount of staff time that goes with that. Maybe not the 4 hours of this program, but some amount.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at this point, obviously, cumulatively over time, staff spent a lot of time on this program. Our city attorney's office has spent time on this program. Certainly, city council has spent time on this program in responding to it. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely been sort of costs associated with it. I will say in terms of the review that's necessary now, I know that there's perceptions out in the community that's an arduous process. It's probably one of the most cursory applications that we have. We intentionally stripped it down to try to make it as basic as possible, particularly for projects that weren't coming right along with a building permit and a new development plan. But to just tear down your house and to get an allotment, the submission requirements are, I don't know that I can make them more basic than they currently are. And really, the most difficult part is getting the survey aligned and moving through the process. And I will say from staff's time, we've got, relatively boilerplate pre-application summaries that explain the program to folks so they know what they're going to need to do to apply. And, the materials for council, the materials that the applicant needs are, I'm not going to say quite boilerplate, but they're developed and our time commitment from a staff perspective are dropping as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that even without an allocation program, some of these fees would still exist.
Yeah.
But, okay, thank you.
A question, on P&Z, we were seeing what I sensed to be some applications to maintain nonconformities, potentially because these applicants were not able to get a demo allotment permit. Do you have a sense of how many projects, since this program has been around, have renovated because of whatever feeling around the demo allotment program?
Yeah, I will say it's a combination of things. First of all, I would say to P&Z, we have had, I'm going to say in the last year, we've probably had 7 or 8 cases that have been what we call a continuation of a nonconformity, which means that they're not triggering demolition, but they're messing with some aspect of their house that's not conforming, either something that's in the setback or their floor area or something. I will say to the point where we were getting situations that our current code around nonconformities wasn't sufficient, we just wrote a fairly significant interpretation to give some direction to applicants about how we're thinking about those kinds of applications. I think it's a variety of things. I think in pursuing a significant renovation project that does not trigger demolition, there's a few advantages. One, you don't have to go through the steps of getting a demolition allotment, which I do understand is some additional process. But it also allows you to not have to mitigate your basement. If you have an existing basement and you're not demoing, ComDev staff is not going to be calculating the square footage of your basement within, your new basement within your affordable housing mitigation, for example. Or if you have a house that's over your floor area, if you don't trigger demolition, you get to keep that floor area moving forward. So there's some other advantages to a project other than having to pursue a demolition allotment that make some sense based on the code. And I will say that we seem to have had an uptick in those kinds of applications that have gone to P&Z in the last year and a half.
Okay, thanks. My straw poll vote on this is to not eliminate the program, but I am sensitive to both Sam and Bill's case here. I think there are not just some tweaks, I think there's major modifications that potentially need to happen. I'm always in favor of trying to find a solution that works for people on both sides and the extremes on both sides versus throwing out something that has come forward out of a serious concern for the community. So that's where we can talk about it more, but that's where I'm at on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So I think that means we're going to be moving on with potential modifications of the program. I would like to just add a simple comment or two. I think it is important to, when we look back, to not forget there was a lot of pandemic influence, but it also, this happened in concert with short-term rental regulations. The two together were dramatically changing the town. And particularly without the short-term regulations, buying a home, demoing it, turning it into 6 bedrooms with 6 bathrooms and a shared kitchen to be an STR was the type of application we were starting to see, not a residence, not something that would ever be a residence but would be a mini hotel. So there were more forces at work at that time that I think it's well worth looking at. The other thing that, it's kind of thread through in here is community impacts, and it's hard to put empirical data to it, but the length of time and the complexity of the construction that we're seeing now is very different than construction 30 years ago, except for maybe on Red Mountain then, I don't know. But, if you talk to anyone about traffic or congestion, you hear constantly about the sheer volume of construction vehicles that people can't carpool, they need their tools, they need their fittings, you never know what they'll need. And so I think that that's one of the feedbacks we all get from the community is about construction traffic and what it's adding to our traffic. And that's kind of why I asked the question, how many buildings are being built now? And it's 74 minus some that are finished and some that are just starting. And then there's the 35 permits that are out, 14 are pull-up building permits and other ones haven't. So you spread that around a town our size, it tends to be a lot of backhoes and a lot of beepers and a lot of construction that people feel the impacts to. So that's all. I just wanted to say it was more than just the neighbor hearing the hammering. It's the congestion on the 82. It was the short-term rental issue, which was really blowing up at the same time. I guess we should go into some of the things we might want to consider here for the options for improving. And I don't know if I'm making it better or worse to just throw things out there to begin with. But I think that I would like to see a greater number of the long-term ownership permits.
Okay.
And
If I may.
you want to go through each?
If I may, and as I show these coming slides, and it tracks with the options that were provided in the memo. We've got a little bit of work to do before we sort of land on specific code changes. And so in each of these areas, staff would be comfortable with some general direction from a majority. If there are specific ideas that you have related to that, that would be helpful to convey to staff at this time. But we don't need to land on specific code changes at this time. We'll be doing some drafting. We'll be engaging with the community, getting feedback from the community and coming back to you with specific code changes based on that. And I will say that these options, they're not the only options that were sort of listed in the memo. They're things that staff has heard, either from the council table, members of the public, comments from members of the staff who have kind of observed the program. So again, you folks, I'll take whatever comments that you have, but we can talk about each of these kind of buckets of potential as generally as you would like, and that general direction from a majority on each of these would be sufficient for staff direction.
Okay, so you want to go through the rest of your slides and
That's
then kind of straw poll as we go along?
Or we can talk about them individually, or we can wait till the end.
Well, why don't we go through them?
Okay. It's not exhaustive.
Yeah, I think go through them all briefly, and then we'll come back to them, because there could be some synergy between the different ones.
Fair enough. We'll go that way.
Okay.
So, I think a lot of the frustration at the council table has been the amount of time, some of the dynamics that Councilmember Rose described with people coming forward with needing to explain their whole history of their time in Aspen as justification for a longtime local. There's certainly some things that we could do to further simplify the application review process. We could turn it into a fully administrative under most circumstances, the appeal process, the things that come to council. We could make changes to the program to make it fully administrative under most circumstances, that could reduce the sort of time for applicants, certainly take things off of council agenda. We could also, if you did want some additional board review to this, we could move the burden from city council to planning and zoning commission. I will say that planning and zoning commission tends to have space available on their agendas in a way that, sometimes is a challenge for city council. And so I will say that that's an option if you would still desire some board review. And we can also kind of streamline process when allotments are not available. Very briefly, and I described it in a previous slide, if somebody applies, there aren't allotments available, we've got an issue, a denial notice, they've got to do a formal appeal process, kind of a formal appeal letter. We could streamline that process when allotments aren't available. So those are some options. I will say any of those things in terms of code response and technical code revisions would all be fairly easy to achieve. We could expand the number of annual allotments, either or both the number of regular allotments to more than 6, or the allocation of more than 2 to longtime local allotments. Again, very easy to sort of pull off. These start to get a little bit more complex as we go forward. We could change the criteria for getting an allotment. I think looking at this, the first bullet there, we've done a pretty good job of that with our new waste diversion program. The new demo projects that are coming forward are going to be subject to the provisions of that code. I don't know that would really be much of an outcome we would see, but incentive towards electrification, we could increase affordable housing mitigation requirements, other heightened standards, mass and scale reduction, reduce extent of subgrade. I do know Mr. Maple, who has made comments on this topic. I think one of his critiques of this program was that he thinks, at least some comments that he's made previously, is that one of the most impactful things is when we've got big basements that are sort of being included as part of construction projects. Do we want to reduce that as an option? So again, we could change the criteria. I don't know that we need to land on specifics this evening, but I think if we wanted to change the criteria, we could add some additional criteria. I do think that this becomes more complex, making sure that we're not having unintended outcomes of whatever the policy would be would take some staff work. We could modify the criteria for getting a long-time local allotment. I've heard many comments both at this table and in the community about this. Reduce the required number of years of less than 35. We could provide better framing for the relationship of owners to heirs. That has been a topic of complexity that we've had to navigate on a few cases. And then I've heard also, we had a case that came before council on appeal probably 6 weeks ago of a longtime property owner, had a long, rich history in Aspen, but didn't meet that occupancy requirement. That is also part of the longtime local. We could change something like that. Again, this bucket of things could be easily done. This number 5. I've had a lot of conversation with folks. Councilmember Rose has had conversation with staff on this topic. I certainly understand the intention. We gave a lot of thought to this when we were putting the program together. Giving preference to, I think everybody in the community, for the most part, starts to get concerned when we see very nice homes that were built in the late 90s and the early 2000s into 2010s. They're pursuing demolition allotments. I think that's something that there's probably more common agreement on. I think when we start talking about homes in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 80s, depending on the quality of construction, I think there's probably more recognition in the community that some of those homes were not constructed well, are going to be difficult to renovate, difficult to expand, et cetera. And so I'm not suggesting that there's not a way to achieve this. I will just say that staff, and I've conveyed this to pretty much everybody I've talked to who suggested this, I do think that there's some concern about getting at the outcomes and sort of ease of program administration and setting standards about which homes can be torn down and which can't based on their age or some evaluation of their quality, that becomes a very difficult thing for staff to evaluate consistently and fairly. So we can do it. I do think that landing on a program that would be consistent and fair would be challenging. We could also, I think to Councilmember Benedetti's comments just a minute ago, I think there's some intersection with those comments. We could provide incentives for projects that do not demolish. Creative solutions here are possible. There are other areas of the land use code where we could sort of get out of the way or make that process of pursuing significant renovations that don't pursue demolition more straightforward, more easy. I've heard that as a topic of conversation in several places. So those are the 6 buckets that I think reflect, most of what was discussed in the memo. Again, we can get into the weeds as individual council members want to with their suggestions. But I think for staff's benefit at this time, kind of a rough majority perspective on each of the buckets and whether or not there's more majority direction to sort of work in that space, staff can take that direction and move forward.
Okay.
Okay. I was just going to say, there seems to be a good synopsis of some of these on page 7 of the memo, if you want to look there. Further simplify the application and review process, expand the number of annual allotments, change the criteria for getting an allotment, modify the criteria for getting a long-term local allotment, give preference in allotments of allocation to homes that are of certain age or condition, and pursue additional incentives for significant renovation projects that do not pursue demolition. It was kind of a list, although it's not fully comprehensive. Let's just go through these kind of one by one to give a little feedback. We're not going to make hard decisions, and I understanding that your overall vote was to eliminate the program, but if it was not being eliminated, would further simplify the application and review process be something we'd all like to see happen?
Yes.
Yeah, I think across the board.
Can I say more?
Yeah, please. Yes.
I just wanted to say, yeah, I mean, I went to Ben months ago to talk about this, how it should be criteria-based. I do think strongly that elimination would be just the easiest form of action to make all these improvements that you talk about, doing it on the other side of the coin rather than keeping the program. I think you can eliminate the program and do a lot of this anyway to still get the intended goal and alleviate the pain of a lot of these homeowners. Just wanted to say, like, a personal mantra, especially up here on council, is treat others the way you'd want to be treated, which is, I'm sure many feel the same way. And when you go through this process, you would think to yourself, okay, if it was an easy administrative burden and application process, like, that's wonderful. If there were more permits to be given, you didn't have to go through a lottery and then an appeal process, that would be nice too. Something for certainty. But one of the things I really want to talk about with this list is the criteria based in the age of homes is if we approve all of these demo allotments, once again, what is the point? If we, if someone applies that built their home 10 years ago and they go into the demo allotment system and all they have to do is win the lottery or appeal to us, threaten to sue, we've never really wanted to deal with a lawsuit here. We've settled every time, which I think speaks volumes to how this goes because we don't want to say no to people. You just got to put in the criteria that says, yes, you deserve a demo permit, no, you do not. And I think you got to do it in the simplest possible way and have the appeal process for the ones that are murky, that are, if the typical real estate assumes a 40-year building life. So anything over 40 years, like, are we going to deny that sort of thing? We don't deny anything anyway. If it's less than 40, if it's less than 30, like, then I can see why it would come to us for appeal to be like, okay, state your case, why you deserve a demo permit, what criteria we can have. I still need to follow up with Shay Stutzman from Stutzman and Gerbaz. He told me that he could come up with some criteria, and I feel like reaching out to some of these demolition partners would be incredibly helpful with stuff like this. But ultimately, I just want to signal that this should not be arduous, especially to our longtime locals, because none of us up here would want it to be so arduous. And when you ask for a demo permit and your home deserves it, it's completely different than when your home just doesn't deserve it because it was built like 5 years ago and there's no defects.
Right.
And then that's the part where I'm like, it shouldn't be a number, it should be criteria based, because we can still solve the same problems, but why are we putting these people through this like process where they've been in their homes for 40 plus years and they have to appeal to us and hire lawyers? So I've stated my piece. So anything to make this easier, and I would just add, please, more criteria-based. Age is like a good one, but like it should be only appeals for things that are really in the murky nature and the things that you feel like guaranteed. It's the best compromise that I can think of.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that whether it was the original GMQS for building permits and allotments that way, or this program, the appeal allows the council to borrow from future allotments. And so that has become, it could be a simpler process. I think Ben has alluded to that in the memo. And, maybe it's not even the term appeal, because that is what makes people think that you need to get a lawyer, and you don't. And this is one of those things that I think borrowing from future year allotments should be more of a different title that would accomplish this. But the reason that none have been turned down is because the council has always had the ability to borrow from future allotments. But we set up more of a burdensome process to get there, unfortunately.
But I'm just saying the system is now where it's set up to be behind. We always say yes, and the one time we did almost say no, we got scared, settled, and avoided a lawsuit, so.
Well, that might have been before my time,
Yeah,
if I
or
remember
Dave,
correctly, but.
Before and after your time.
Yeah, that's a funny way to put it.
Yeah.
The one other thing I've really thought about that I just didn't see on the list is more not this construction diversion and management and things like that, but the actual management of construction sites. And I think, it's one thing to say these 3 people need their trucks because of the tools, but you tend to see a lot of other small cars showing up with just one worker to jump out and jump in. And it's the extra parking in neighborhoods, and you come home and you can't park anywhere near your house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, what? And it's all, and it's the traffic. So I think the one thing I would add is, how do we come up, whether it's demolition permit or remodel or commercial, that we have a better management handle. And you hear from people over in the neighborhoods where people can park that they'll just charge the $50 a day ticket to the job. 3 people will park over here, 1 people comes and drives into the yards, the job site. And we've got to have that parking at Brush Creek or something like that. So I know that's a new ask and that's different, but I think that's, a bigger part of it to me is the construction site management.
I think to Councilmember Rose's comments, I do, I'm supportive of this. Will say that the current sort of system and the language that's been long time in GMQS does make it arduous. I will say that, once lawyers got involved, again, I think to your point, a simple resolution with council could have done it, but I think we turned it into a settlement agreement because sort of, lawyers were involved. I understand why. But I do think in this case, I think there's all kinds of ways that we could streamline the process within GMQS. It would require changing some longtime provisions in GMQS in terms of that review process. But I do think it would be appropriate, whether it's on construction mitigation requirements or, quality of homes, whatever. I do think that the alignment of an eased process with some more concrete standards that allowed some, meaningful review criteria around these projects that were standard and boilerplate, I think is not at all a bad solution.
Along with increased numbers.
Yeah, well, we're getting to the next questions here. So does that further simplify the application review process with thumbs up across the board. Expand the number of annual allotments. How do?
Before we move off of this slide, can I just
Okay.
get some general sentiment? Again, in lots of places in the land use code, there are things that come to city council that I think sometimes frustrate city council that you folks are talking about these things. This might be one of those things. I can certainly make this administrative for the most part, except for in probably some individual circumstances. Is there a desire to still have some board review and move it to Planning and Zoning Commission as opposed to coming to City Council as the default?
I'd support it to take some of the drama out of it for the applicants.
Well, let me ask, when you're saying fully administrative, that would be the first choice, and then it wouldn't need planning and zoning and streamline process when those aren't available?
I don't exactly, I haven't fully baked this out in my head, but let's say that there were no allotments, and let's say all 26 allotments were granted, and so maybe there's some guardrails that staff administratively can issue multi-year allotments that meet the criteria out to 2 years into the future or something like that. It's just an idea, but again, trying to take some of that to bring more predictability to the process, to bring more certainty,
speed.
and to reduce burden on city council's agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just asking, is it have to be administrative or P and Z or in front of council? I would personally say fully administrative under most circumstances and not burden the P and Z with it either.
Yeah, agreed, but if it has to go to a board, I think
But if it has to
P&Z.
go to a board from administrative, you're thinking P and Z?
Yeah.
John, what is your?
I'm just going to say, since I was part of the council that declared the moratorium, I kind of own this program. And, I've just always felt like I signed up for this. And so I don't mind being, whatever you want to call it, the jury for demo permits. I don't want to shirk away from that if I don't have, unnecessarily. But if it takes some pressure off the applicant that they're just going to P&Z instead of in front of council, that's a positive in my book.
Okay.
If we can do it fully administratively, that would be great.
Okay.
But again, I'm not scared of being confronted in city council by people who haven't gotten their allotment. That's, again, I take responsibility for it.
My answer, fully administrative, because if we're just going to say yes anyway, just give them the next permit. That's what happens every single time, unless we go to criteria-based.
And we're getting down that list, so.
Bill.
Okay, and Bill,
Yeah, I agree.
fully administrative, okay. There we go. You do your slides versus my little list. Why don't you take us to the next one you want to, expand the number of annual allotments.
I think they're relatively in order of what you have there. Again, this is a fair amount of discussion in the 2022 action. Right now it's 6 and 2. There was a moment leading up to the 24 lottery where council made a decision to add 2 to the available that were in 24, so we had 4 available for the lottery. So staff's open to this, either or both. And I will again say that this is a fairly easy code change to make.
Okay. Who wants to go first on this one?
All right, fine.
I'm happy to.
Oh, there you go, Bill. Go for it.
Bill, go for it.
Yes to both.
Okay. Others?
I'll let someone else go before me.
I can see some increases to this numbers. I personally see more going to the long-term local allotment. You were saying that an average had been as low as 8 a year. When we saw the seasons heating up, it got as high as 13. Maybe some years were higher than that. I could see getting to an 8 and a 6 type of thing, an 8 for the regular, 6 for long-term local. And the long-term local tends to lean a little more towards the older homes, so that's part of what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking, as you have in further in your memo, move it down to 30 years. But, okay, others, now that was just me.
As far as increasing the number of regular allotments, I remember having long discussions about this, and without going any further, I'm happy to leave that number because we talked about that for we dedicate a lot of time to that. The long-term local allotments, I'd be happy to increase that a little bit because that seems to be where we're spending most of our time.
Agreed. I'm okay with increasing the number of long-time allotments. If the average, in terms of the regular allotments, if the average was 6 over 9 to 10 years of tracking and we increase the number, then what's the point of the allotments if we're above average on them? So I would suggest keeping that the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I would increase both, and I would say also ask the council to start fresh. I mean, one of the failures of this program is that it fell behind immediately, and it has become frustrating because every permit comes to council because we're always in appeal mode.
Right.
How about actually having a lottery again? Because once again, if you're going to go fully administrative, then just say yes and just give them the next permit anyway, and the number's the number.
Okay. And Bill, you...
Christine, I think one important note is that the average number of permits of 6 per year that you just referenced included a number of post-Great Financial Crisis years, which I think artificially skewed that average down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you'll come back with some ranges anyhow, kind of trying to merge the collective hive mind here of your board. Change the criteria for getting an allotment.
Based on comments that I just heard, it may be that there are some things, whether it's creating more concrete, certainly updating our current requirements around data provision and getting rid of the construction and demolition waste or, ordinance requirements because they're already there and standalone. Maybe there's some things in coordination with increasing the number of allotments, easing the review path, and also sort of simultaneously creating some sort of more concrete sort of criteria under this bucket.
Yeah. Is there anything from this list that we'd like to eliminate? Other heightened standards, mass and scale reduction, reduce extent of subgrade. Those are much more significant changes to the development community and to potential home designers and architects. So I don't know that that was something that I was bringing forward or that, so I'm asking, is there something that can come off this list? If there's anything to go on this list, to me, it's actual construction site management, of how are we just impacting the neighbors. I mean, this is where the neighbors really feel the impact, is over parking in those areas. And, is there more of a defined timeline for the completion of the project? I mean, I'd love to see that more on commercial buildings, as we've seen, but, it should be, let's try to tighten that whole aspect of it up. Do you see further increases to construction waste diversion, or you're saying that one's pretty well accomplished?
No, I think we've accomplished that with our ordinance. And I think the reality of what's actually happening on projects is much higher than what we've set the standard at.
Good.
Just the reality of it. And so I think there's some real opportunity there. I will say we're having a rather large organizational conversation around electrification, in pursuit of that. And so maybe there's some, additional thinking that could happen there related to these projects.
Okay.
We did, significantly increase affordable housing mitigation with the 22 moratorium. However, we were very conservative in those calculations related to long-term operations and maintenance. I'm not suggesting that staff supports that, but it's, it's an option that we have in the code. And then again, the heightened standards, just because I've heard it discussed in the community as the alternative to the impacts that this program was trying to get at. Do we shrink size of basements? But again, I understand the impact to the development community of those kinds of things, certainly. So they were ideas that we've heard on this topic.
And I think we shouldn't forget any of them.
Okay. So as a group, we're, not pushing big changes, but we'd like to see what you kind of come back with is kind of what I'm catching from this conversation.
I think there's some interesting ideas around criteria around construction site management and construction timelines.
Okay. And then what would our
Rachel,
Bill?
just to make sure I'm heard on this one, I'm totally opposed to these criteria. The only criteria that I could ever envision working in this scenario is the age of the structure, which Ben has shared his opinions on that separately under number 5 and expressed that he does not think that works, but it's the only thing that I think could be equitable and reasonable. I think that these are dangerous, very difficult. I think Ben is underestimating the degree of difficulty of incorporating many of these into our code. And I think the gamesmanship that's going to result from some of these is really dangerous, not supportive at all.
Yeah, I share your concerns on a lot of these, Councilmember Guth. I will say, the electrification topic, we've got state laws that staff is responding to that are coming down the pipeline as well, and so sort of getting out ahead of some of that was the thinking around that. But the other ones I agree are challenging. I do like the construction site mitigation topic, but we'll come back with some ideas.
Okay.
This has been a topic that I've heard a lot of comment on at the council table and out in the community. Happy to take direction on this one in terms of what you're thinking.
So just asking what you mean by the third bullet there, remove occupancy requirement. So you're saying that if someone had bought a home here, they've been renting it for the past 10 years to someone else, who knows, 4 years, whatever, but now they've decided they'd like to sell their home.
Yeah, and this was raised because there have been a couple of the appeals that have come to city council where the folks bought a family home for vacation purposes back in the 60s. They've owned the home since then, but they have lived elsewhere and used their home primarily as a second home, vacation home for their family over time. Oftentimes, I think as we know, a lot of these folks have really meaningful contributions to the community over time, but they don't meet that occupancy requirement that's currently in the code. So one option, just because of some of the cases that have come in front of council, is maintaining the ownership requirement.
Like getting rid of the
perhaps
occupancy.
eliminating the occupancy requirement.
Okay, council, how do we feel about that one? The very last bullet.
Yeah, I would make it easier.
You would remove the occupancy requirement.
I mean,
Yeah,
this is
but retain the
painful 'cause
ownership.
it's-
I know.
yeah, 'cause once again,
I-
why are they knocking down their home? Does it deserve to be knocked down? Or have they just lived here a long time, don't even occupy it? It's just,
I will tell you that 2 of these homes that I know about are a couple of the most charming homes that have received demolition allotments.
exactly.
Right. So it's, again, I think just, coming up with criteria for these, it's not sort of black and white is a challenging scenario, but we can navigate this.
Other thoughts? Bill, what do you feel about?
I'm okay with that. I can think of a lot of scenarios where people have, bought a larger property, maintained a smaller property. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have those property rights. So I'm totally okay with removing that residency requirement. I'm also open to reducing the required number of years and providing better framing of those relationships.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, if we're allowed to answer as broadly as that, I would agree with all three of those as well. Others, you're okay with looking at those to modify the criteria?
I'm okay with looking at all three.
Okay, and you, Christine?
Yeah.
Okay, and you're, okay, very good.
Okay. Okay, I promise these next two are relatively quick because I think they're fairly broad, and if there is direction from council on either one of these, I will say these two are fairly difficult to arrive at, but if there's direction from council, staff will give resources to thinking about them. I do think, again, this has been discussed even this evening, but certainly has been discussed previously, coming up with some criteria for sort of age of home. I will say age as a binary sort of metric is sometimes challenging. Some homes that were built in the 60s were built poorly, have very little architectural quality, contribute perhaps not as much as others to Aspen's architectural fabric. Others are the opposite of that. They were well-constructed, are beautiful homes, continue to have lots of charm that contribute to our very rich architectural pattern. And I raised a topic in the memo that I think if this, circumstance we're sitting in Aspen in the 1920s and we were looking back on our Victorians, the Victorians weren't built particularly well, and they probably would have all been torn down had the economics in the 1920s in Aspen been the same as we are looking back at the homes from the 80s, 70s, and 80s in this community. So it's just a difficult thing to sort of evaluate. I'm not saying yes or no, and I understand the impetus of this. It's just arriving at something that sort of makes sense to respond to what council's wanting out of this policy is a challenge.
I'll tell you, the one thing I really thought about when I was looking at this is that there are some better quality and there's some worse quality homes of every age built. And some would have architectural significance going forward. We certainly talk about the panabodes and things like that of different time periods in Aspen. This sounds really off the wall, but it is, you have to be 100 years old to be historically designated?
It's specific to the Victorian era homes.
But I was kind of wondering, because then we have the postmodern.
This Aspen Modern program, that's voluntary.
That's a voluntary. Well, when we talk about additional incentives for projects that do not demolish, can we make the postmodern program a little more people aware of it, or add some incentives to that program for people to choose that alternative of remodeling and not demolishing? But I mean, I'm not saying to force anything here, but I'm trying to say, when you use that term additional incentives, it made me think, well, what do we have to start with? It has to be at least 40 years old, but if you're built in 1965, you're a 60-year-old home now, and that it may have some characteristics that are worth trying to preserve the same way we do with historic preservation. Now, I don't know if that's a property tax allowance of a deduction or something like that, but I would love to look, what are the additional incentives for projects that do not demolish? And that was my one thought on that one. Preference to homes of a certain age. I would be less concerned about the age of the home than more about its efficiency for energy use, and but we don't want to make these guys into property appraisers and inspectors to try to determine, oh, is it over the line or not? I mean, we have a part of our code that forbids demolition by neglect for historic structures. You can't just let them stand there until they fall apart in the rain, so you have to maintain them to a certain level. But it just, I would have a hard time thinking about what the criteria would be for a home that's 40 years old.
Yeah, and I will say that the building code doesn't give us much help in this regard.
Yeah.
You're going to be seeing a case in the next few weeks of a home that's in really bad shape. And the building code does not sort of give us direction to condemn the property, because the problems with it can all be mitigated, sort of according to the building code. So again, those criteria just, they're difficult to land on in evaluating one property to the next. But
Yeah, it's almost like you want to put a roadblock up to homes that are only a certain age, you know, that were built in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
Or something kind of reverse of preference to older homes as opposed to standards about a truly newer home. So that might be an opposite way of looking at this. And it may not be something that we settle on in the long run. This is just a little direction for him to try to take a look back. You know, there was that one home on the way to the Meadows that was fairly new, and then it was bought and taken down because it was destroying someone's views. And there was a point in time in which Nick and Maggie DeWolf had bought the lot next to theirs and moved the house off, I think, to make their gardens a little bigger. Now the property's sold, it's been re-subdivided, and a house is there now. But, you know, so we certainly have had examples of very new homes being taken down. At least the one at the Meadows, they donated all the building materials to junior hockey. So does this seem to be enough direction for you, Ben, on
Yeah.
these guys?
the last I would just ask, because I do think some of these things are outside of the demolition allotment program, are looking towards other sections of the land use code that could create incentives for projects that don't demolish. This, just an idea that, again, I probably wouldn't need to touch the demolition allotment program,
To do this?
but it would be in some other sections of the land use code or other sections of the building code.
Christine, you were about to say
My, and just general feeling about this and the direction that I think we're trying to get to here is, I don't want to see this program become more cumbersome and more complex with the modifications that we're making. I think if anything, simpler and more efficient for both staff and applicants. And that's where I'm at on this. And so removing some of these layers in whatever way we can make this a better program.
Yeah.
Agree, not supportive of number 6.
Not supportive. Okay.
Not supportive.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once again, if we were gonna say yes anyway, like, hopefully it doesn't have to come to council, and following up on what I should have followed up on, which is if you can talk to Shay Stutzman, since he at least said he had criteria in mind.
He is certainly, on this slide, a important member of the community stakeholder group that's identified there.
Yep.
Yeah. Just very quickly, and then we're done, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and attention to this. We'll go back, do some necessary code drafting and sort of a further analysis. We will engage in inform and collect feedback effort with community stakeholders, both generally and also people that are directly involved in this kind of development and redevelopment. And with the intention of coming back to council with an ordinance that this would go into effect in 2025.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it for today. Is there anything else? Nope. Great.
Night all.
Good night, Bill. Thank you for zooming in with us. We appreciate your input. It's always very valuable. Good night, Grassroots.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you later.
Likewise.